If you want talk, games, and fun all rolled into one, well, you've come to the right place. This is The Game Show, where host Bradley Clarke and his special guests talk about the world of television game and competition shows. But Bradley's guests aren't here to just talk. They came to play a game as well. What will today's topic be? What game does Bradley have planned? There's only one way to find out.
It's time to start the show.
You heard the man. Welcome to The Game Show. And here's your host, the Bradster himself, Bradley Clarke.
You know you'll be humming that theme song all afternoon. Thank you so much, Austin Angelo, and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of The Game Show, the talk show all about the world of television game and competition shows. And I'm very excited to announce that for the first time ever, this episode of The Game Show is going to be not one, not two, not 2.5, but 3 hours long. That's right, episode 47 of The Game Show is the first ever 3-hour episode. So sit back and relax because 180 minutes of fun and excitement begins right now. I'm Bradley Clarke, the Bradster, and I hope all of my fellow Amazing Race fans are listening to this episode because I am once again going to be joined by a former contestant on The Amazing Race. Now, if you are a true Amazing Race fan, you should know by the audio alone which season of The Amazing Race this is the opening for.
I'm standing high above the center of New York City. For generations, the crossroads of the world. A world that will soon play host to 22 people who have decided to take a break from their everyday lives and embark on a race around the world for $1 million. The contestants will be racing without the benefit of personal computers or cell phones. They've been stripped of all money, credit cards, and maps. Their greatest resource will be each other as they circle the globe in teams of 2.
Can you see the images as the audio plays? Because I certainly can. An aerial shot over a snowy New York City, a young Phil Kogan standing on the roof of a building, and a bus that reads The Amazing Race, traveling across a bridge and eventually arriving in Central Park. What you just heard was the opening of Season 1, the inaugural race around the world. Or as a former guest on The Game Show calls it, The Amazing Race, period. Well, if you knew without hesitation that the audio cut was the opening of Season 1, you are going to be really excited when I play you this audio cut because one of these two is my special guest on The Game Show today.
Robert and Brennan, best friends and attorneys at the same firm.
We've both kind of been silver spooned in our lives, grew up with good educations and a good job, but that doesn't really matter when you find yourself hungry in the streets of Bangladesh.
I'll let you know right now, the guy who just spoke in that audio cut is not my guest. His Amazing Race partner is my guest. So if you're a Season 1 expert, you know that the person who was just speaking was Rob. And since their team name is Rob and Brennan, I hope you can figure out where this is going. My special guest is one half of the first ever winning team on The Amazing Race. In 2001, he circled the globe with his friend and fellow lawyer and crossed the finish line first in Flushing Meadows Park. Joining me on the line is The Amazing Race Season 1 winner, Brennan Swain. Brennan, thank you so much for joining me on The Game Show today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
It is such an honor to have you on the show today, and I don't think you understand how excited I actually am to chat with you today. I first watched Season 1 when I was 8 years old, and I can truly still remember the day I watched Episode 1 of Season 1, and being in awe of every single element of the episode, including your trek down to the boiling pot to claim the fast forward, which we'll talk about shortly. So it means a lot for you to take the time to talk with me about The Amazing Race today.
I really appreciate that. And it is still cool to me that 19 years later, I still get emails and messages from people who are just discovering the show now, streaming. And so super cool to hear that you were a fan back when you were 8 years old. I guess that's another great thing about the show is it spans anything from 8-year-olds all the way up to older folks. It's a family show. And like I said, 19 years later, I love the fact that there are still people catching it for the first time.
And I have to give a shout out to your friend and fellow Season 1 racer, Kevin O'Connor. He was a guest of mine on The Game Show, and he helped me get in contact with you. And he told me that you are the go-to guy when it comes to Amazing Race Season 1 trivia and tidbits. So I picked Kevin's brain, but I can't wait to pick your brain as well.
Well, hopefully I can remember things. It has been a while, but yeah, it is funny. Over the years, when Kevin has a question or something, whether it's from a friend or a fan or anybody that he can't answer, he'll shoot me off a quick text message. So shout out from me as well to Kev. Kevin and I became super close after the show, have remained so. And 19 years later, we still talk quite a bit. It's actually cool that I've made a bunch of friends for life and a lot of the racers. But other than Rob, Kevin is definitely the one that I am closest to from season 1.
And Kevin referred to season 1 as the Amazing Race period as we went through our conversation. Do you also refer to season 1 as the Amazing Race period?
I think that's definitely, we'll call it a Kevinism, but it is funny that when you watch season 1, of course, that was the only season where Phil did the voiceover during the intro, and it really was like nothing that had ever been done before. The show was called The Amazing Race. It wasn't called The Amazing Race 1 back then, and so I don't call it that, but I think I'll go ahead right now and I'll say it is The Amazing Race, period.
It's the most daring competition ever attempted. 11 two-person teams, bound by friendship, love, or family, will race around the world. They have no idea where they're going, what dangers they may encounter, or how the journey will affect their lives. Most of the teams will be eliminated, but the team that reaches the finish line first will win a cash prize of $1 million. This is a race like no other in history. This is The Amazing Race.
So we're going to chat about a 30-day adventure during the span of one episode of the game show. And then later on, Brennan, I have an Amazing Race trivia game all ready for you to play to prove how great of an Amazing Race memory you really have.
All right, looking forward to it.
So 15 years after first watching season 1, I can't believe I get the chance to talk with you. Are you ready, Brennan, to talk about The Amazing Race, Season 1?
I am ready.
All right, well, I'm going to channel my inner Phil Kogan as I say, the world is waiting for you. Good luck. Travel safe. Go. And we're off. So the first question I want to ask you, Brennan, is where did you and Rob first meet and first begin to become friends?
As you mentioned before, my fellow lawyer, we're both lawyers. We worked at the same law firm in Los Angeles. About the time I started, Rob, I think he came in about 4 months after me at the law firm. And we met just through working at the firm and became friends from there and have been friends ever since. And people often ask me whether I'm still friends with Rob. He just welcomed his first son. His name's Max. I'm Max's godfather, and I still see Rob every single week. We are very close and have remained so ever since. I also was the best man in his wedding, so you really can't get much closer than that.
Well, that is good to know, because a lot of times when people come off some of these shows, things happen because of the stress of the race or whatever it is. But I'm glad that 2 decades later, it still says best friends / lawyers under your lower third.
That's right. If they ever do a race where they ask us back, it'll still say best friends / lawyers.
So in May of 2000, Survivor premiered on CBS, and it was such a huge success. Did you watch Survivor when it first came out? And if so, did that spark any interest in maybe trying to get on a reality competition show because they were so fresh and innovative at the time?
I actually did not watch the first season of Survivor. A lot of friends did, family did. So I wasn't a fan, I guess we'll say, of the first season, but I did actually have a few different people send me emails and say, hey, you'd probably be good on Survivor. So when season 2 came around, obviously didn't apply. But coincidence of it is when Rob and I did apply for Amazing Race, we were in casting in the hotel where they have the final few teams before they decide who's going to race when Survivor 2 premiered. And so we watched the first episode of Survivor 2 while in casting. And I became a fan at that point of the show. And I watched religiously Survivor season 2, but I was not a fan of season 1.
I watched your interview with Phil on his podcast, Bucket. And you mentioned how you got into the casting process and how you first heard about the show. But I was curious. So back then, you were 29, Rob was 27. And now 20 years later, as we've seen, reality competition show casting has drastically changed. Do you think if you were applying for the first time today, you would be casted?
So from a reality competition show generally standpoint, I do think so. I think there were certain personalities they were looking for back then. And I think we're the type that could get cast on a show now. Now, specifically on The Amazing Race, that's a tough one. And the reason is because, as you know, as a fan of the show, over the first few seasons, there definitely were a lot of young male friends that won the show. And so I think they got to a point where they did stop casting our type. Now, they have come back for a few teams, obviously, over the seasons, but that's a tough one. Of course, the way you worded that question, now that I think about it, is you said 20 years later. So, of course, now Rob and I are in our late 40s. So now we're two late 40s best friends. And I think there probably is a good chance we'd get cast because that is a different type and not necessarily a type that has won The Amazing Race before.
Well, we're going to talk about whether you think maybe an all-winter season would happen later on, but I would certainly hope because you were fun to watch as young guys, and I would think even with more life experience that you have, you would be even more fun to watch now.
I agree, and maybe we'll hold it until we get to talking about a possible all-winter season, but I think our team dynamics have changed. Rob and I have now known each other about 23 years, I guess we'll say. Back then, we were best friends, but we didn't know each other as well. I've traveled a lot since then, so I think there would be a lot of different team dynamics and things that we can bring to the show that we couldn't back when we were in our 20s.
So let's talk about the race itself. And of course, we're going to start at the starting line, which was at Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, good old New York City. Now, all of the teams were transported in this bus to the starting line. But as I understood, the windows were blacked out and you couldn't see what was going on. But I know that although you didn't grow up in New York City, you did grow up in New York, in Rochester. So I'm curious if you were trying to figure out mentally where the starting line was possibly going to be based on figuring out where the bus was going, or just you had a mindset of, oh, this would be a great site to start the first ever Amazing Race.
It's a great question. And at the time, I really didn't. And as you said, I grew up in New York State, but I didn't know New York City very well. The one thing I certainly did realize, I do have a pretty good sense of direction. And even though the windows were blacked out, the blinds were down, I could tell that we were going in circles. And they drove us around for about 2 hours. They said afterwards that it's because production wasn't ready for us. I think maybe that was partially true, but also maybe they were just trying to disorient us as to where we might be going. We're in this bus for 2 hours. Maybe we're way outside of Manhattan now, but I could tell we were still in Manhattan. But I actually did not think about Bethesda Fountain, I didn't even know what that was, or Central Park in general as being the starting line.
Back in season 30 at Washington Square Park, they had the opening for season 30 of The Amazing Race, and they allowed fans to come. So I was one of those fans in the crowd. So as a true Amazing Race fan, I was so happy to watch the ongoings of a starting line. Obviously, you didn't have the fans around, but I'm curious if you remember how long it actually took between getting off that bus and when Phil said go and you began racing.
There's kind of two answers to that. One is it seemed like it was hours because you're just so nervous. We obviously had no idea what to expect. We get off the bus. They did take some shots or video of the teams kind of walking around separately that they didn't really use much at the beginning. Then they got us to the starting line. Phil gave his intro a bunch of times. There were kind of some safety protocols. There's a bunch of things they went over at the starting line. Like I said, Phil did his intro a bunch of times so they could get different shots. There was a helicopter overhead part of the time. And it seemed like hours because you're just so nervous. But in reality, my guess is it was probably only about 45 minutes from the time we got off the bus until the time Phil actually said start.
Was that the first time you saw Phil? Because he was relatively a new figure in American television at that time. Was that the first time you actually met Phil or knew who the host was?
No, we actually did have a couple of days before the show started where they were going over all the rules and the different safety protocols and so forth. For example, we didn't know what a route marker was. We didn't know what a roadblock was. So they had to go over all that with us. And in one of those meetings, they brought Phil in and introduced him to us as the host of the show. So we did get a chance to meet him. And just like you said, of course, none of us had any idea who he was. Now, Phil, 32, 33 seasons later, is the face of the show, but he was just a fresh-eyed host ready to go, but we did get a chance to meet him.
And when you were being told for the first time what a roadblock is and what a fast forward is, was that when you and Rob started strategizing what types of challenges each of you would take on when it came to the roadblocks and started discussing when maybe you and Rob would go for the fast forward?
Yeah, we definitely, for the roadblocks, when they told us that there were going to be tasks that only one of us could do, we did talk about that, thinking about what types of tasks there could be. For example, everybody knows Fear Factor was a popular show back then. And on Fear Factor, they got to eat some crazy stuff. I think they did that on Survivor as well. So we kind of knew there was a possibility of that being a challenge. I've got the stronger stomach. We knew right then I'm going to do those types of challenges. We actually had been both training before, trying to get in better shape. Rob, for whatever reason, spent a bunch of time on the Stairmaster. You'll remember one of the roadblocks in the second leg was to go up the Eiffel Tower. So that's why we chose Rob to do that one, because he had to go up a bunch of stairs. So we did talk about what our strengths were and what would be better for any of the different roadblocks that might come up.
So once Phil said go, this was the first ever go in Amazing Race history.
Well, in just a few minutes, you'll be leaving on a race that'll circle the globe. Along the way, you'll be required to complete a number of tasks. Now, some of these will be physically challenging, others will challenge your mind. Now, listen carefully. There are 8 elimination points in this race. The first one is going to be happening very soon. Now, once you start, you need to complete your tasks as fast as you can, because the last team to get to the elimination point will be out of the race. Does everybody understand that? Okay. This is a travel packet. Now inside is all the information you need to get going, along with some cash. How you use the money is completely up to you. But remember, you won't be getting any more of it until you finish this leg of the race, so if I can give you any advice, make sure you spend it wisely. Now your travel packets are attached to the luggage you brought with you, which is at the top of these stairs. When I give you the word, you can go up there, open up your packets, and what you do after that is completely up to you. All right, everyone, the world is waiting for you. I want to wish all of you the best of luck. Travel safe. Go!
Come on. Get yourself to Johannesburg, South Africa.
Johannesburg, South Africa, my God.
Oh my God, we may only travel on one of these 3 flights.
Alitalia number 605.
Swiss Air 101.
South African Air number 202. Hurry. Seats are first come, first serve. You took must come first. Let's go.
When you open up your first clue, I notice in the left pocket of the route marker envelope, there is what looks like a small map of the world with the Amazing Race logo on the top of the page. And I was wondering what that was, because to me, it didn't seem like the actual clue itself. It looked just like a map of the world.
I don't remember exactly what that was, but I can take a guess because we did receive them a few times. It really wasn't much of anything. There were kind of some generic maps that would just kind of show, in this one, maybe here's New York City, here's Johannesburg, South Africa, and it may have had some other language on it, maybe, like I mentioned before, kind of safety protocol. There's always a little bit of extra information that's boring for television. They don't need to air, but we need to know when we're doing certain things. So it was probably something like that. I don't remember there being anything on that very first clue or in the first envelope that was any more helpful than what was read on the air.
Phil says go. You open up your clue. It says go to Johannesburg, South Africa. And you were one of the 5 teams on the first flight. Now, the episode showed Joe and Bill and Frank and Margarita arriving at the South African Airlines counter, first and second. But I was curious what position you arrived, because you weren't shown actually getting to the counter.
Yeah, we got there at pretty much the same time as Frank and Margarita, because one of the things I do remember is as I tumbled out of the cab, throwing my backpack on, because those things were heavy, I remember almost running into Margarita. We got there at about the same time as them. When we got inside, as I think they did show for Joe and Bill, the counter was closed at the time. So we all kind of got there about the same time. Like it showed, I think the Guidos did get there first. And I do remember Pat and Brenda coming in behind us because Pat actually had a walking stick with her, kind of like a ski pole that telescoped, and they wouldn't let her bring that through security. So they had a little hold up there, but they still ended up being one of the teams on the first flight.
And the first clue, we as a viewer didn't get to hear where you had to travel to once you landed in South Africa. And then when you actually did land, all you really had to do was find a box in the airport. Was that said in the clue, find this box in the airport?
Yep. So your question before about the map piece you saw, that's probably what was on that. When we landed, there was some information that talked about, I believe it was someone, like a person, waiting inside the terminal, and they would have a little yellow and white flag they were holding, and you had to find them. And they handed to us the route information, the one that told us to go to Ryan Blake Air in the airport that had the charters.
It's so fun watching the first race because now we're so used to clue boxes and red and yellow flags, but literally on the first race, sometimes there'd just be a box on the floor.
Yep. In this one, it literally was no box. There's a guy standing there with a bunch of envelopes in his hand. And when you get to him, he just handed it to you.
And that was your first ever clue given to you on the race course.
That's right.
That clue told you to make your way to Lanzaria Airport to sign up for a charter plane to an unknown destination. So literally within the first two clues, you have no idea where you're going. You have no idea how this is really going to work. And now you're going to another unknown destination. So this is really a great start to this unknown adventure that's going to last 30 days and 35,000 miles. And one of my favorite moments is when Frank yells, at the airport because he was pissed that he came in second to the charter plane behind Joe and Bill. And then you and Rob come up the stairs and are like, what is going on?
I told you, anything but first is a loss. Let's go. Come on.
I'm coming.
Move it.
All right. You guys on the first flight out.
Okay.
Can't tell you where you're going to go, though.
Welcome, welcome.
Margarita and Frank, you guys on the first flight out.
That is amazing. All right. Congratulations. Good job. I cannot believe this. I can't believe this. I hate this crap. Ah!
That doesn't sound good. Oh, sorry, Marguerite. Okay.
It's okay.
I have very, very high expectations of myself.
We were still in the first plane. What's wrong with you?
I was curious what you thought Frank was yelling about.
The funny thing is I remember Rob in particular being a little more concerned than I was, but I think he was yelling so much, we thought something was wrong. And I think the reason he was yelling is we had no idea how the race was going to work. We thought you need to get out front fast. We didn't even think about the fact that there would be bunching points. And so Frank, because he gets to the airport second in New York, then he gets to the other airport second. And so he was just frustrated that they maybe in his mind were falling behind. But when we heard that yelling, I actually did think something's wrong because we were coming up the stairs to where we had to sign up for the charters when he was doing that yelling. So that was the issue.
And how far apart were the charter planes?
They were, I believe, 2 hours apart. I want to say they were 5:30, 7:30, 9:30, and 11:30.
Wow, so that's a huge gap.
It was a huge gap. And it's so funny because looking at the race now, there's no way they would leave that much time in between teams.
Right, yeah, now everything is so close together. Literally a 30-minute lead is the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why they edit the episode to make it look like a lot of teams are getting there close. But once we got on that first charter, unless we did something drastically wrong, there's no way we were getting eliminated.
So you arrive at Victoria Falls, this great wonder of the world, and there's this epic shot, probably one of the most famous shots in Amazing Race history, of two silhouettes running across the bridge. And then you hear Drew saying, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But to be honest, no one really knows who really the silhouettes were. I think it's you and Rob. Do you think it's you and Rob as well running across the bridge?
This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
No, it's funny because Kevin and I talked about this way back. So quick side story. Of course, as you know, the original race was supposed to air in the summer, like Survivor did in 2000. And after Survivor 2 was popular on TV, it was the #1 show, and they knew that reality television could stand up against scripted television, they decided to hold our show until the fall. So we were really in anticipation of wanting to see something. So in the television industry, there is an event called the Upfronts, where all the networks show their big fall shows. And I think it's sometime in the spring. And because Amazing Race was one of the most hyped shows, they had a 15-minute trailer of things from the first episode. And Kevin had a friend in the television industry that got us that clip. And Kevin happened to be visiting in Los Angeles, and we watched that thing over and over. And we noticed at that time the silhouettes. And we said, that's not Kevin and Drew. And I don't think it's us either. I think, this is just my guess, I don't know this for sure, I think it's not even anybody that was racing. I think it might have been some kind of like test run by production or something like that, and it's two non-racers. That's my guess, and that's what Kevin and I came up with when we were watching, because we could not decide who those two silhouettes were out of the 11 teams that were running the first race. And I've never asked anybody in production, but that was my guess.
It's one of those Amazing Race quandaries we might never know the answer to.
That's right.
So when I had Joe and Bill on the game show, I've had them on a couple times, and they were telling me that in the first season, if everyone used their fast forward at a certain point, the producers had the option to institute another fast forward, meaning any team still in the race could still use another fast forward, because as you know, you can only use one during the race. Was that one of the reasons why you used your fast forward on the first leg, or you thought, let's just get in the lead first leg, and let's make sure we're not eliminated on leg one?
So it was neither of those. Like I mentioned before, we hadn't thought about bunching and obviously hadn't learned about bunching because it's the very first leg. So our thinking was, when they explained the fast forward, they explained it as if a team, say in 9th place, used the fast forward, they could jump all the other teams and win the leg. That's what the fast forward could possibly do. So our thinking is, if we're in first place, and we knew we actually knew at that point that we had gotten to that very first clue before Joe and Bill and Frank and Margarita, because all three of our teams were kind of looking for it at the same time. So we knew we were first. So our thinking is, if it can take a team in 9th place and move them to first place, and we're in first place, this is going to give us a huge lead, and we can ride that lead for a long time, not knowing we're going to get bunched together. So it's so funny now. People look back on it and they're like, what a dumb decision to take the fast forward on the first leg. But we just didn't know. And that was the reason that we decided to go for it. We just thought it could give us possibly even an insurmountable lead, and we could ride that thing at least for legs and legs and legs.
Right now, any team can win the right to skip all tasks left in this leg of the race. To win this right, they have to search for the fast forward pass.
Fast forward.
Huh?
A fast forward. I'll be dipped.
Okay.
The clue inside this envelope will lead the teams to the fast forward hidden at the bottom of the canyon, to a place called the Boiling Pot.
Boil pot. Boyle's pot. You know Boyle's pot?
Now, there's only one fast forward pass hidden on each leg of the race, so the first team there gets it. Any other team searching are just wasting time.
Hello. Where's the pot boil or the boiling pot? Can you take us there? Can you take us there? As fast as you can.
Boiling. Oh, God, how far long is that, David?
679 yards. It's less than a half a mile.
All right, he said go. Here we go. Oh, lovely.
Hell yeah! Congratulations. Go directly to the next pit stop, Songway Village.
Hell yeah!
It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I'll be all right, but I don't think anybody else could have done that.
David.
What?
There's the flag.
Over there?
Yes.
Oh. Some other people went and got it. Oh. We gotta go back the same damn way.
I don't know whether I can.
I'm going so much, I haven't taken time to be smart. And so hopefully the two of us will smarten each other up and slow ourselves down a little bit.
The only thing I'm sort of feeling right now is kind of dumb.
Well, plus two, now that I know that each charter plane was 2 hours apart, that would have gave you a huge lead if the idea of bunching and airport delays were not a factor.
And that actually kind of solidifies my point. You're absolutely right. At the time, we would have been doing the math that if the last charter is coming in 4 or 6 hours, however long it was, after ours, and that fast forward thing, whatever it is, we don't know what it is, could take one of those teams and move that team all the way up to the front. because that's how it got described. And that certainly would not have been the case. In other words, if one of the teams on the final charter went for the fast forward and nobody else had, they wouldn't have caught up to us. So to be honest, it was a poorly constructed first leg. And in our calculations, we'll say this thing's got to give us a huge lead. And it wasn't the case. As a matter of fact, even though we did the fast forward and Joe and Bill did the bungee or the whatever you want to call it, they only came in just a few minutes behind us. So that fast forward, we knew at the time was pretty much a complete waste. But people always ask, they say, do you regret doing it on the first leg? How can I say that I regret it? Because we still won the race. So who knows what it could have changed.
Well, actually, it was funny because my next question was going to be, because you knew that your fast forward power is no longer a factor in your race, did that give you and Rob an extra motivation knowing now you have to always be racing hard? Now you always have to be making sure you're not the last team because you don't have that get out of jail free card in the fast forward.
For sure. We actually talked about that when we knew afterwards that it was probably kind of squandered. We thought, you know what? Now we don't even have to think about that. We open the clue. Here's a route information. Here's the fast forward. Just throw the fast forward on the ground and get to work.
And I'm curious, when you saw David Margaretta attempt the fast forward, because Rob had said that that was the hardest thing that he had ever done, and then you saw David Margaretta do it, who are in their 60s and are grandparents. What were you thinking? Because you had just done it and you seemed exhausted, and now you see David Margaretta doing the same thing and for nothing.
Yeah, it's funny because Rob must have said that as soon as we got to the top, probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was definitely difficult. Some of the rocks when we got toward the bottom were really slippery. It was actually kind of treacherous. It was the kind of thing where you slip on a rock, break your ankle or twist your ankle. And it was very difficult. And as a matter of fact, that is why we only checked in a few minutes ahead of Bill and Joe, because it took us a long time. So you think the trek down and back up took as long as it took teams to go find Batoka Gorge, to do the zip line, to do the bungee, and then check in. So that's how long it was. And as a matter of fact, it was grueling enough that our cameraman and sound man did not go with us. They went at the very beginning and then they left us and they had a cameraman waiting at the bottom when we actually got the fast forward. So it was difficult enough that they didn't send our camera crew. So Dave and Margaretta were incredible racers for their age. They were great people. And it doesn't surprise me that they were able to do it, but it was definitely difficult.
There's a scene of you and Rob giving out flags to some of the people in South Africa, and you called yourself diplomats as you were racing.
Here you go.
Thank you.
There's some money.
Thank you. Here you are. Have a good day. We're playing a game, but we're also sort of impromptu diplomats for our country, and we want to behave as best we can. I mean, we're guests in other people's countries, and it's just a way of showing our appreciation for them letting us be here. And the kids like it, so yeah, it's really a cool thing to do.
Did you also give out flags throughout the rest of the race? And did you see yourself as diplomats because this was the first ever time a show like this was ever produced, a race around the world?
Yeah, so that idea actually came from my father. I hadn't done a lot of traveling before race, and he went on a trip to Jamaica, and he happened to have some little American flags with him, and he gave them out to some of the kids, and the kids loved them, he said. And so I thought, that'd be a cool idea to take some of those with us. And for us, it was just kind of something to maybe endear ourselves to some kids along the route or be able to use for something. I don't think we necessarily thought of ourselves as diplomats. Well, I think Rob even used the term impromptu diplomats. I was going to say that was an impromptu response when he gave it. But looking back on it, I think we definitely were diplomats, or we wanted to be good examples as we travel, because as Kevin said in the first episode, they're the ugly Americans. Nobody wants to be the ugly Americans when they're traveling. And so you definitely wanted to show respect when you're in others' countries.
And especially since you travel from New York City all the way, basically almost halfway around the world to South Africa in the short span of however long that first leg was.
Yeah, that's another thing is they made it difficult on that very first leg. Here we are in New York, and next thing you know, we're in Southern Africa. Pretty crazy route to go and a long way to go for the very first leg.
Now, Matt and Anna ended up being the first ever team eliminated, and they checked in after the sunset. And the episode showed, I'm presuming this was the first day wrap party. Did Matt and Anna really check in while everyone else was partying, or was that just part of the editing?
No, they definitely did. They basically shoot us all off of the area where we were, partying. Really is kind of the right word. A few people were having some drinks. They had food. Rob and I knew that we were leaving. I think it was 11:23 at night. So we didn't have any drinks, but some of the teams did. But they had some food for us, and they were playing music and doing a little bit of dancing. And at some point, all of a sudden, they shoot us all out so that Matt and Anna could check in.
You are correct. You did leave for the second leg at 11:23 p.m.
I'll always remember that. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you the exact time on other legs, but for whatever reason, I always remember 11:23.
So going on to leg 2, you and Rob decided to form an alliance with the second and third place teams, Joe and Bill, aka, as you call them, Bert and Ernie, and Frank and Margarita. By the way, did you come up with that name or was it Rob?
I came up with it, and I can tell you the exact story when it happened. We were doing a photo shoot for, I think it was Entertainment Weekly, with all the teams, and we kind of knew the Guidos were going to be conniving because they were, even during casting, they kind of skirted some of the rules. We were supposed to stay in our rooms at the hotel where we were, but they'd sit outside some, and they'd watch to see what teams were going in, more interviews than others to kind of get an idea of who might be the teams that get picked. So we kind of knew from the beginning they were a little bit conniving. So there was a point we were doing the photo shoot and all the teams were kind of sitting there. And I looked down at the two of them, and for whatever reason, I think it was Joe, he just had kind of this funny little innocent look in his eyes. And I just thought, hey, look at Bert and Ernie down there. And I said that to Rob, and Rob actually laughed so hard he kind of had to turn around and step away for a second. And then on one of the early legs, Kevin and I were talking about the Guidos. We were actually trying to decide who are going to be the teams that you want to work with, who are going to be the teams that maybe are going to be the conniving or the villainous type teams. And then I made the joke to him that Rob and I had called them Bert and Ernie.
Did you find it a coincidence, or maybe just you knew that these were the three strongest teams, which is why you aligned with them on the first leg, that you three teams were going to end up being the final three teams?
So I think that's a coincidence. I can tell you exactly why we aligned with those teams, I guess is the best way to put it. So we actually wanted to align with Frank and Margarita. The reason was one of the camera crews, actually they weren't our camera crew yet. There were two guys that were from South Africa, and they were talking about how dangerous it can be sometimes traveling at night in Southern African countries, because we were in Zambia, of course. And we were just a little bit worried leaving at 11:23 at night. So we just thought maybe we team up with one of the other teams. So we approached Frank and Margarita, but of course, Frank and Margarita were in third place. Then we thought, well, maybe it'll be a little bit weird if we stand there and wait for them at the start line after we read the clue, and then Joe and Bill are going to come read their clue. So we thought, you know what? Maybe we should include Joe and Bill in this and just the three teams. We did know we were strong teams, and we thought maybe the three of us can work together and we can gain enough knowledge that maybe it can keep us ahead and maybe stretch our lead from the other teams. So that's why we ended up doing it that way. And Rob and I were definitely the ones that came up with the idea. And the lawyers that we are, we actually negotiated with the other teams that if we're going to work together and we all get to another pit stop and check in together, we're going to check in the same order, 1, 2, 3. And in the end, that's why Joe and Bill, once we were going to Paris, and that's where they had lived for a few years, they decided, well, why are we going to stay with these guys? We don't want to have to check in second every single time when we're going to our place where we used to live.
Rob and Brennan, who got in at 11:23 a.m.
Leg one, baby, out in front.
Will set out at 11:23 tonight in the dark.
You're well acquainted with the Songway Village. Now make your way to the Songway Museum.
You gotta hope that there's a route marker no matter what time of night it is at the museum.
Yeah, good to see you.
We're gonna wait here a little bit tonight because we're gonna go in to be safe with two other people, with two other groups. So there'll be 3 cars going together. The strategy is to team up with Margarita and Frank and Bill and Joe. What's going on?
Steady pace, guys.
Here we go.
Stick together, steady pace.
3 of us all the way to the end, baby.
All the way to the end, baby. We're gonna rock us. All right,
let's go. Let's grab our. Now Margarita, remember, said she thought she saw a sign to the Songway Museum.
Yeah, I think she's right. We have no intention of trying to screw you guys. My word is my word.
Is my bond.
You're the man.
So you got that Songway Museum in your mind?
You guys go first.
Come on!
I feel very comfortable with the 3-part alliance or group that we've done here. I think we're the strongest ones, both physically and maybe mentally.
We decided last night that we'd be better off if we just kind of bonded with the other two teams that are in first and second place. You know, we figure if we stick as a pack, we'll still keep ahead.
And the whole idea about you and Rob, Joe and Bill, and Frank and Margarita following in order came into play during the leg 3 detour.
Well, by that time, the alliance was over. They just didn't abide by the rule because we arrived at the Pantheon first with Frank and Margarita, so we're still in an alliance. That means we're one there, too, and Joe and Bill got there after us, so they need to go in third. And yeah, then you know what happens once we got inside.
Well, I think
we made an agreement outside that we'd walk like gentlemen up there in the order that we arrived at the gate. Us, then Frank and Margarita, then Bert and Ernie.
We're first in line. Yeah. $5 when we go inside.
It was by order of who got there. We were obviously the third there. So when we got inside, Brennan and Rob, who were first, kept walking. And Frank and Margarita walked past.
The shot.
Over here.
And the gal that was manning the gate finally went, guys.
Oh, this way.
Billy was right there. It's not like we tried to sneak in front of him.
Just one team.
Why don't you ask any questions? You always just walk.
Good, because I was.
We all agreed outside to come in orderly and go in, order of 1, 2, 3. Bill and Joe being the last.
There's a cat.
Friends until the door opens.
You're gonna be kidding.
Read it.
We're getting screwed all the time, man. Try to let people go in order and all this stuff, and then we get screwed.
It's another route guide. Yes. Find the man in a blue suit. He's standing across from the hotel. What's going on here? I thought we were going to go now.
Okay.
Merci. Au revoir.
Unlike what the rules say now, during the Season 1 pit stop rest time, teams were allowed to mingle with the other teams and possibly strategize. Do you think that not allowing for mingling is a disservice to teams now? And do you think if you were not allowed to mingle in Season 1, the quote-unquote alliance would have even occurred?
The alliance definitely would not have occurred because we did that during the pit stop. There's no question about that. And it really was, like I said, the original idea was for safety purposes. So I don't think that would have happened. It's a good question. And I think from a production and television show standpoint, I understand why they don't allow them to mingle, because things like that alliance are going to come up off camera, because that's when the camera crews are getting a break as well. So that's why they don't allow mingling anymore. From a racer standpoint, I think it does a huge disservice just because, like I mentioned before, Kevin, after the show, was one of my best friends. And like I said, we're still close. And that was only because of the time we had during the pit stops. As you probably know, Emily and I dated for a short time after the race. And that was because we got to know each other well during the pit stops. And so I think just from a racer standpoint and just from a personal making friends and getting to know each other standpoint, I think it's a disservice. But I certainly understand why the producers don't allow the mingling now.
It's one of those tricky situations because actually one of my favorite moments as an aspiring host myself, I love the moments where just Phil is saying, during the pit stop, teams can eat, sleep, and mingle with the other teams.
The teams arrived here at the end of the last leg. Each team must stay here for 12 hours, during which time they can eat, sleep, and mingle with the other teams.
And now you don't get to hear that anymore because those aren't the rules anymore. So as a fan from the early seasons, it's such a disappointment to not get to see that they get to mingle with the other teams anymore. And it comes out during the race too. Like you'll see teams not even know who is still in the race, or you'll see them for the first time and, oh, you're still here? You're in the race and you don't even know who's in the race.
I think that's something that they changed even earlier, not necessarily the eat, sleep, and mingle, but when a team checks in, they ship them off pretty quickly so they can't see who's going to come in. Now, obviously, they know during the early seasons once they all arrive back at whatever the pit stop is. But yeah, for season one, there were many times where, because teams were checking in close to each other, we'd just be standing in the background watching the teams check in. And that, I thought, made it pretty cool. That's another one I can kind of understand why they don't allow that anymore.
So the next destination was Paris, France. And of course, as many Amazing Race fans know, that the Guidos lived in Paris for quite some time. Now, when was it that you first found out that Bill and Joe were familiar with the city and possibly thought, oh, they're definitely going to break off and do their own thing?
That's a difficult one to answer. The reason is, one of the things that happens after 19 years is when you've watched the race a number of times like I have, you get a little bit clouded by just what you said, the fact that the viewers see the Guidos say, oh, we lived in Paris for 2 years. And so that is what jumps into my mind, seeing it on the television show. So they actually did have a conversation with us on the plane on the way to Paris to tell us that they were going to break the alliance. And I can't remember if they told us that that was why. There's a good chance they probably did. They probably at least wanted to tell us why they were going to break the alliance. They probably just said, hey, we know Paris well. We think we have an advantage because we used to live there and we're breaking the alliance. But I honestly don't remember when I learned that.
Was it awkward afterwards, especially the leg 2 pit stop? Was it awkward being around them knowing that they had just broken off this alliance that was basically less than a leg old?
Yeah, it was. Like I said, we were talking about the Bert and Ernie nickname. We kind of knew from the beginning they were going to be the conniving team. And when that happened, that just solidified our thinking. And it definitely did make it kind of awkward. And it became, we just want to beat Bill and Joe, which for them, I think nothing wrong with it. Smart. They kind of got into our heads by doing that. But it did make it awkward at the pit stops for sure.
So moving on to leg 3, the first clue of that leg was to travel to Le Grand Roue, which was a Ferris wheel, and that was where you would find your next clue. Now, it's interesting. The Ferris wheel closed at 12:30 a.m. that night. And when you departed for leg 3, the lower third graphic said that you and Rob departed at 12:11, but there was always a clock next to the mat at the pit stop, and that read 12:06. So I'm curious because Frank then in the DVD bonus footage said that they had left at 12:09. So I was wondering if you knew when the actual departure times were.
So 12:06 actually sounds familiar to me. My guess is that was when we left. And it does make sense that Frank and Margarita would have only been within a few minutes behind us because, of course, we're in our alliance and we checked in together. And like I said, we checked in ahead of them because of the agreement we had. So I think the 06 and 09 makes sense. Now, as you probably know from interviewing other people, there were a lot of production time penalties and credits and things like that. And I shouldn't say penalties, not necessarily things that people did wrong, but there were time changes because of production issues. And maybe the reason they said 12:11, maybe we got some kind of advantage. They took a few minutes off. That I don't remember. Or maybe it was a mistake. Who knows? But 12:06 actually does sound right to me.
How long did it take to get to the Ferris wheel? Because you only had about 20 minutes to get there. Did you get there right as it was about to close?
Yes. And so that's a good question because we could see it, of course. So we just started hoofing it down the road and it didn't look that far away. Well, as we're going, I think I was actually the one that said, guys, we're not going to get there by 12:30. We need to jump in a cab. And maybe anticipating your next question, I don't know, but we'll keep the story going with what we did next. We decided we got to get a cab. So we ran across the street to a cab stand that we found. And Frank and Margarita had a cop come up to them and started asking them because, well, not Frank and Margarita, it was more to their crew because you have to have a filming permit to film on the Champs-Élysées, which is the road that we were on. And so Rob and I, our thinking was, well, if we both wait around, once they get this sorted out, we're going to have to find 2 cabs. So we thought they're going to get this sorted out because production is going to show them whatever permit they have. Let's just jump in a cab and get down there. They'll get it sorted out. Then they only have to wait for 1 cab. They'll hop in and they'll get down there. And we both got there before 12:30. And of course, as you know, Frank took that completely the wrong way. And he thought we were trying to ditch them, which we were not. We just thought, let's get in a cab, get down there. They'll get it sorted out and they'll get down there because we knew how close it was to 12:30. And that's really what our thinking was. Looking back on it now, it wasn't even a thought of trying to ditch them or thinking, hey, maybe if we get there first and they get caught up, they won't make it by 12:30. We never once thought of doing something that would have made them fall back in the race or something like that.
And that was an interesting thing that Frank said because, the leg before, Margarita thought she knew where the Songway Museum was, and then that eventually led to a 2-hour goose chase off the property, back onto the property. You finally found it. It was literally down the road, and you never broke away to try to find it on your own in that pack of cars. So it was interesting that Frank thought that you were trying to break away in that instance.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from Frank's standpoint, it makes sense. I think looking back on it now kind of troubles me is that they didn't either give us the benefit of the doubt or ask us about it. They just assumed that we were trying to ditch them, and then they got pissed off and hated us for the rest of the race. Like I said, I get it. If they're standing there and they're dealing with cops talking to them, and then they see their partners jump into another cab and take off, they're like, those guys are trying to ditch us. I understand that thinking, but the fact that they just never even asked us about it and just decided that we did it in a conniving fashion, that'll always stick with me a little bit.
Towards the end of leg 3, you were still sharing information with Frank and Margarita, such as to get off the train at the Avignon station in order to get to the pit stop at Le Beau de Provence faster. However, Frank and Margarita at that point were already trying to separate themselves from the alliance with you and Rob. So did you ever get a sense in leg 3 that your alliance with Frank and Margarita was coming to an end?
For sure. Yeah, we could just tell that they were angry with us. And I remember Rob and I had a conversation. When we learned that that was the faster way to get there, we actually had a conversation. Should we tell them? And our minds were, they haven't said they've broken the alliance like the Guidos did. We're still in an alliance, so let's give it to them. So that's why we did it. And we were trying to honor our alliance, but we knew that they were pissed off at us.
And the first alliance in Amazing Race history lasted all but 3 legs.
Exactly.
The first clue in leg 4 involved the teams figuring out that they needed to get to the country of Tunisia and find a man located at what looks like a smaller version of the Arc de Triomphe. And basically, you're only given a flag of Tunisia, which you didn't even know was to Tunisia, and the instructions to take a boat from Marseille. Now, I asked this question to Kevin. I was curious about your thoughts as well, because this was very interesting. So the first season, the actual clues, what the Amazing Race calls clues, actually were clues and riddles and puzzles. And actually, I guess that's what the term clue came from, even though now the Amazing Race still uses the term clue. They're really more of directions rather than clues, but season 1, they were actual clues. So when you watch the race today, do you find it a bit challenging to get through the fact that you had so much more extra work just to figure out where some of these places you had to go to were, and now they're really just given exact pinpoints of where to go sometimes?
For sure. And I think a lot of fans like you that have been around since the first season, they recognize that. And I've definitely seen people online say, oh, I remember when the clues were actual clues and you had to think about them and you had to figure them out. And it did make it more difficult for us, of course. And that was one of those because none of us knew what the flag of Tunisia was.
From this remote castle in the south of France, the teams have to find this man. The catch is, he's waiting for them in another country, and the teams haven't been told which one. Their only clues are this picture, this flag, and the instructions to take a boat from Marseille.
We saw the moon and the star, which of course is a symbol of Islam, and we all thought it was Turkey at first. And so it took us some time to figure that out. But that's another one that goes back to production, and they realize that the thinking in our heads or whatever we have to do to figure out what the clue is just didn't make for the greatest television. So it's more nowadays about the tasks. And so that's why they tell them, hey, go here, versus take this flag, look at this picture, get to the country, find the thing in the picture, and find this man. Yeah, I mean, that's a real clue, but it just didn't necessarily make for the greatest television. And I think that's why the clues nowadays aren't real clues. They're just instructions.
Well, also, too, back then, you didn't have the pleasure of the internet to look up what the flag would have been. Now, at least, you know, if you got a picture of a flag, you could have just asked anyone on the street for their phone or got into a hotel to look for it on the internet.
Yeah, you're right.
And actually, as someone who appreciates good game formatting and good strategy and based on the game, I particularly love it, watching someone figure out what flag the country that you have to go to is representing.
Yeah, for sure.
In season 1, you were allowed to actually call for cabs during the pit stop duration. Do you think that teams should be allowed to do that now because that's a good strategy? Or do you think that goes back to, well, that's part of production while we're not really, quote unquote, in production because we're at the pit stop?
That's a tough one because, I mean, I guess production's doing that once again because there's no cameraman there to take the video of us calling the cab. And so it doesn't make it on TV. That's probably why they do it. But at the same time, how exciting is it on TV watching someone call a cab? So that one, I don't see why they don't allow teams to do that now. But that was definitely part of our strategy every single leg was call a cab and have one waiting, even if we don't need it. There may have been a leg or two where, you know, you call a cab and then they have some kind of transportation for us and we don't need it. So I'm surprised they don't let teams do that one now.
Well, interesting because even when you were allowed to do it, they still didn't show it on TV. Like they never showed you and Rob calling for a cab. So I really don't see why you wouldn't be allowed to do it today because even when you could do it, they still weren't showing it on TV.
Yeah, and well, that's like I said, probably because it's boring TV. Hey, Rob and Brennan called a cab.
So there was a moment where you were telling your cab driver to not call a cab for Frank and Margarita, but Margarita intercepted that conversation. Was this the point where you officially realized the alliance is done?
No. The reason I did that is because we realized 5 minutes before then, the alliance is done. So what happened is, because we could eat, sleep, and mingle, we tried to talk to Frank and Margarita during the pit stop, and they wanted nothing to do with us. So we were 90% sure that the alliance was done. So as you know, one of the rules in Amazing Race is you have to read your clue out loud so the cameraman can get a video of you doing it. Of course, I say cameraman because it was all men on our season. And when they opened their clue at the beginning of the fourth leg, they stood there in silence and they read it without speaking out loud. And it's because we were standing right there getting ready to leave. And so at that point, we knew the alliance was over. So since we had the foresight to call a cab ahead of time and they did not, I was just kind of pissed off. And I'm like, hey, this is our cab. We called him. He shouldn't be giving you an advantage. And plus, we wanted to get in and go. It's a race. So the team that just broke an alliance with us, we don't want our cab driver helping them. We want to get in the cab and we want to move on. We don't want to stand there while he gets his phone out and calls a cab for you guys. So that was my thinking. We were definitely ticked that they had just broken the alliance and we wanted to move.
as we were on the top of the castle, the lawyers, they're still asking us, what are we going to do? How are we going to strategize? Could you read a route mark in front of us, read it out loud so we could know what's going on and have, a few more minutes of preparation? They're still trying to be very friendly. Here we go. We didn't do it, so I just nice and quiet as we walked down the road.
It definitely said to go to Marseille, right?
All right. What do we have?
Looking like China. Is that China? You've seen the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Now find the smaller version at the Porte de France in the country represented by this flag. When you get there, find this man and say Assalamu.
Turns out we needed a taxi. We had called ahead for a taxi, and that was perfect.
Taxi?
Tu veux un taxi?
Taxi?
Yeah, can we...
Bonjour.
Well, actually, let's make sure they don't take our cab.
I have a reservation now. Yeah, it's probably for us. I need the passport. I have it.
Yes. Robert.
Please, vous téléphonez, s'il vous plaît? Merci.
Brennan stands in the way. He says, don't call anybody, blah, blah, blah. Don't talk to them.
Yeah, we're in a competition, and we're the one that call you. We'd rather just...
I hope you're not telling him not to call, man. That's like really sabotage, though. To tell him not to call for us, that's pretty screwed up.
We just want to know.
If you want to do it like that, that's cool. If you want to do it like that...
No, it wasn't about not working together. It wasn't like that.
15 minutes. Merci beaucoup. Okay, merci.
Wow.
For 2 pit stops, we waited for them after we read the information. And today, there was no real rush, and for 7 minutes, they take off on us.
They're liars.
Right,
I told you that.
But the thing is...
The lawyers are liars.
No, but it hit me now.
Liars
because
are lawyers.
If they were talking about we're working together, why didn't they talk to us last night about ordering 2 cabs?
I mean, when we make our word in an alliance, we keep it. We've always shared information from them. We've waited at the pit stops when we've got there, greeted them with big hugs and happiness, and it just doesn't seem to be reciprocated.
And actually, that brings up another point that I just thought about. So Kevin and Drew, who were in first place coming out of that pit stop because they got the fast forward, there was a scene where Phil was actually shown handing Kevin and Drew the first clue. Was he also there handing everyone else their clue, or was that just for TV purposes? Like, oh, look, there's actually a host of the show.
He typically did hand the clues to all of us at the beginning of a leg. He wasn't there for most of the people at the end of the leg, but he was there at the beginning of the leg. So I'm glad they changed it up when they did, because Phil definitely needed more airtime than he got in that first season. There were definitely times I saw him do stand-ups to the camera that didn't make it on air. And so I'm sure he was happy that in season 2, he was able to do a lot more of that.
So at the amphitheater in El Gem, you performed the roadblock, which you had to retrieve a sword dangling above the pit of death. Now, when you hopped over that gate to grab the sword, how deep was actually the pit of death?
It was deep enough that if you fell, you were breaking your legs. It was a ways down there. And that's why most of the teams, they found those poles to pull the sword in towards them. Well, I'm standing there with Amy and we didn't see the poles. And we thought, well, how are we going to get this? And Amy's like, well, I'm just going to jump over the fence. And my first thought was just from a logical production standpoint. I'm like, there's no way they want us jumping over that thing. You fall in that pit and you're going to get injured. And so she went ahead and jumped over, and so did I.
You go from running the sewers of Paris to jumping over a fence to the pit of death.
Exactly.
Welcome to the first season of The Amazing Race.
Yep, there definitely were some death-defying moments in that first season, and I guess thank God nobody got hurt.
I've always wondered if they expected you to find the pole, or did they really expect you to reach out and grab it? It was interesting placement, especially because some people jumped the fence, some people were like, how do I get this? And they found a pole.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I don't even know how far away the pole was because I never found it. But it is interesting that the clue says go find the sword hanging over the pit of death, but it doesn't say anything about, oh, by the way, you have to find a pole to be able to get to the sword. So the fact that somebody even thought, wow, there must be something around here that I've got to use is actually pretty smart.
You arrived at the pit stop area before Paul and Amy, but Rob called out your name because he wasn't present at the area. Now, I know you have to stand within a certain feet limit from each other and from the production team that you're assigned to. But was it disappointing knowing that you had actually bypassed Paul and Amy to the pit stop, but you placed 6th because Rob was not at the table?
Well, there's huge controversy on this one that they did not show. So the problem with this one, I will say, is because Rob and I are lawyers and we read the rules or the clue exactly the way you're supposed to. And I guess we'll say. So what they had told us in our meetings about roadblocks is a roadblock is finished when you get the next clue. So by getting the clue hanging over that pit, to me, in my mind, the roadblock is now over. So what did I do? I thought, well, I can't open this yet because I'm not with my teammate. So I ran upstairs to open it with Rob, which none of the other teams did. They realized that it was still part of the roadblock. I didn't. Went upstairs and I opened the clue with Rob. Then here I am. We're standing at the pit stop, but the clue says, and this, I don't remember if this made it to the episode or not, but the clue says that we had to go up a certain set of stairs that were between two, well, they called them lamps, but they basically were like torches that were on the side. So in our minds, the clue says you have to come up these stairs. So Rob and I went and ran around like chickens with our heads cut off, looking for that set of stairs, thinking we're only going to be able to check in if we had gone up those stairs. Little did we know, all production cared about was that you got to the pit stop and checked in, because none of the other teams went up that set of stairs. So teams knew we were one of the strongest teams. And so they all complained to production and told them, well, they just did the roadblock together. They should be penalized. And we actually had a meeting with production and had to state our case. They had to call the lawyers back in Los Angeles to determine whether we broke the rules or not. And they understood what our explanation was and they went along with it. And so that's why we didn't get a penalty. But in the end, when I went back upstairs with that clue to Rob to open it, all I really had to do was open it, read it, check in, and we would have checked in like third or fourth place. We ended up dropping a few places because we ran around for so long.
Well, it's also interesting because the editing on the episode showed that the roadblock task was to get the clue and then automatically go and put the shield at the pit stop. To a viewer, usually now, if that's the case where you go directly from a roadblock to a pit stop, there's no clue in between, but there actually was a clue in between. And maybe, I guess that's one of the reasons why they didn't show people reading that clue, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and it's so funny. As you said that, all of a sudden, I guess Kevin says I've got a good memory for some of these things. I literally just remember what the clue was. And remember, I think they did mention in the roadblock clue that there were some ramps that you had to go down. So none of us even found those ramps other than Amy. Everybody else just went in through a main door. So when we read that clue, the clue said, back towards the ramps, there are 2 lamps near stairs left and right. Go up those stairs, show us your wares, meaning the sword. And it was something like, and slam me home with all your might, which basically meant put it in the sheath. And so I'm thinking, well, I don't even know where those ramps were because I never even came down those. So now I've got to go find these stairs. I got to find lamps. I got to go up these stairs. And so, yeah, that clue that didn't get shown on air is what dropped us from third or fourth place to sixth.
And there's another example of how the first season had actual clues.
Exactly. And that was the problem. If it just said, hey, you got the sword, check in at the pit stop, we would have checked in third or fourth place.
And what also is interesting is that they complained that you and Rob were doing the task together, but a lot of other team members not doing the roadblock were actually yelling at their partner where to go down the stairs, where to turn. And now, if you do that, you actually get penalized for even just, telling someone which direction to go.
Yeah, you're right. There was a lot of instructions being yelled from the folks up top, especially once they saw what other teams did. They would be yelling down, Kevin came up this way or something like that. Lots of things have changed, obviously, since season 1, because the roadblock's supposed to be 1 team member performing it, not 1.5.
Right. So leg 5 was a very difficult leg, and it mostly took place in the Sahara Desert. And this was actually the first time that you and Rob actually experienced being in last place, because you were the last team to complete the walkie-talkie detour task. Since you really hadn't seen any of the other teams for a long time, did you think that you were actually in last place and could possibly be eliminated at the end of the leg?
Absolutely. They showed it a little bit, but that was probably our worst performed detour, and we did it while we were in last place. So when we got to the globe, which is where the detour clue was, we were still in 6th place, which at that point was second to last. And Lenny and Karen got there while we were reading the clues. So they were right behind us. We left ahead of them, but somehow, even though we didn't get lost finding the place where we had to do the walkie-talkie task, they beat us there and we didn't know it. They had gotten in and gotten out. And all the other teams were smarter than us on that one, because all they did was they walked in, they could see a cameraman down on one side, went down to where he was, and at least they were in the general vicinity of where the next clue was. For whatever reason, Rob and I decided to go in. We just didn't see the cameraman down there, and we just went the other direction. And we were just going into all the caves, whatever you want to call them, the little dwellings. Then at one point, our walkie-talkie stopped working. The batteries died. We had to get the batteries replaced. It was sort of this weird beeping, and we were so frustrated because we knew we were probably in last place. And even if we weren't, we were just wasting time. And we were in there for a good 45 minutes, where other teams probably got in and out of there within 5 to 10 minutes. So we fell well into last. And one of the top producers told me, I thought you guys were done. Luckily for us, the next task was very difficult and teams got really lost. But we were by far at our lowest point and we were well in last place before we finally found the clue.
And how long did you actually drive in the desert to find that camel roadblock?
That was a few hours, I think, because we went the wrong way at first. Because what had happened, and you've probably heard this from other teams in the interviews, is we had to follow yellow painted stones. Well, you got far enough in, they made those farther and fewer between. We got to a point where we didn't see any. So if you think you don't see any, you must be going the wrong way. So you turn around, you go back, and there was a fork in the road, and we went the other way on the fork. And they did show that a little bit in the episode, the different teams looking for it, turning around and forks in the road and all of that. What it was is Rob and I both knew how to use a compass. And we had our compass, and we got one of those maps that you were talking about in the very first leg. And all the map showed was Tatooine, which is where the globe was. But then it showed Kasar Galani or Galane, however you pronounce it. And it just showed it off in the middle of the desert. The map did not have any of the roads, but it did at least show the direction. We knew we had to go, I believe it was west. So when we turned around at one of the forks and went the other direction, I got out the compass. I showed it to Rob. I said, we're just not going the right way. Even if this feels right, it's not. So we turned around. We said, we're going to trust the compass. We're going to trust the direction, even if we don't see yellow stones, and we're just going to go. And finally, we got to a place where we saw some more yellow stones and we knew we were on the right direction. And I think that made the difference is we knew how to use a compass. And I think some of the other teams did not, or they didn't even try. And that's why they got so lost.
And now you never see a compass on The Amazing Race.
Yeah, we actually practiced. I was a Boy Scout, so I generally knew how to use a compass. But Rob and I actually practiced before the race. We'd get out and try and find things because we really thought it would be more orienteering. One of the other things, a story I tell, is we thought it would be more, not necessarily like the show Eco Challenge, but because of, like I said before, there were no bunching points. We thought, we might have to sleep out in the wilderness. We actually brought a tent with us on the first leg. We realized right away that whether we needed to sleep outside or not, that was weighing us down too much. So we got rid of the tent. But yeah, we just had no idea. So we were ready for camping and orienteering, which, yeah, like you said, there's none of that on the race nowadays.
Well, it's interesting because in the Tunisian outpost in leg 5, the pit stop, obviously, if there wasn't that sandstorm, you would have actually been in the desert sleeping in these tents, I would presume. Not your tent, but another tent.
Yeah, you're right. The tent we would have slept in, there were definitely, I won't say holes, just places where there was a cloth covering or blanket, whatever you want to call it. And then there were openings and there was sand coming in even before the sandstorm started. So it was definitely more rugged. I think that's probably the right word.
So during the roadblock, you were the one that had to walk alongside the camel and guide it. Now, I asked this to Kevin, and I was curious about your perception on this as well. Many of the challenges during season 1 weren't actually challenges per se, but rather, as Phil would describe them, simple tasks. And in addition, a number of the detours were more about choosing one of the 2 ways to get to a specific location, and the roadblocks were sometimes more about choosing one team member to perform one aspect of a task, like, for instance, the camel roadblock. So overall, did you particularly find the challenges to actually be challenging, or was the traveling and navigation the more challenging aspect of the race?
You hit the nail on the head. The traveling and the navigation was. And I think on that first race, because it's a travel race, they thought what would be better is making it challenging. You need a compass. You need to be able to read a map. You need to figure out a clue. You need to book the correct flight because the flights are going to be difficult to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Whereas nowadays they just say, take this flight. And on the other side of the coin, that made some of the tasks easier because it wasn't what was the one at the end of one of the recent races where they have to set up this whole drum kit and you got to get everything exactly right. I think what happens is they realize those types of tasks, they think, maybe I could be wrong because I think the navigation actually makes for better TV, but they think, that makes for better TV than somebody using a compass, which obviously that does. But I think that's my criticism of the race nowadays. And I've said exactly what you said a minute ago. The race used to be about navigation and travel because it's the Amazing Race where you travel around the world, whereas nowadays it's more about the individual tasks. And the tasks are definitely more difficult than we had to do. Now, going back to the task we're talking about, it was a joke how they gave you a compass, you got on the camel, and you looked off in the distance, and there was the flag. And Rob and I were actually kind of mad about that because we had learned to use those. And so we thought, this is going to be our advantage. And then Rob gets on the camel, and hey, there's the flag over there.
That drum kit challenge was the final challenge during season 31 that took place in Detroit. Brad fact! And I think the main difference between the challenges now versus season 1 especially is now the challenges make the race feel very choppy, but the season 1 challenges, since a lot of them were incorporated into the actual traveling aspect of the show, made the race more fluid of a journey as a viewer.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I was saying before, in that the first race and even the first few seasons were more about the travel aspect of it. The show you're watching is a show where people are going to race around the world and you're going to get to see all these amazing locations, and we're going to make it difficult for them to figure out how to get to point A and point B. And part of getting from point A to point B might be some kind of challenge that has to do with the travel. For example, getting on the camel, you got to use a compass to try and figure out how to get from where the roadblock starts to the pit stop. Whereas now it's, hey, here's how you're going to get from point A to point B. And once you get to point B, you're going to do a task in a discrete location that has nothing to do with getting to the next place. And so somehow the producers, I don't know whether they think it makes for better TV, whether it's easier to produce, whether it's to keep teams from getting spread out like we happened to at the end of the first race. I don't know the reasons for it, but the travel aspect of race is definitely gone. And it's kind of the same with Survivor. If you look back at the beginning of Survivor, it was more about survival. They'd all lose 30 pounds during a season, and it was about how they built their shelter and all that. Now it's just all about strategy. All they care about is alliances and who's going to vote out who and how did it happen. It's more the interpersonal relationships. And in the end, it probably is about what the producers have realized makes for better TV. But I enjoyed the early seasons where you had to figure out how to get there.
Well, I always say the term survivor used to mean about surviving the elements. Now survivor just means surviving the vote.
Exactly.
I just mentioned how, since many of the challenges incorporated the travel aspect of the show, it felt more like a journey as a viewer. And I'm presuming that it also felt more like a journey as a racer as well. However, I also think the travel aspect being more fluid throughout the race made the journey actually feel more like a race course and not just 13 different legs, correct?
Yeah, and one of the things my dad asked me after our season ended was, how many different modes of transportation did you use? And my answer included a lot of the tasks. For example, in India, when we had to take an elephant to the top of the Amber Fort, how did we get from the bottom of the Amber Fort to the top to where we had to go find the wise man? We took an elephant. Towards the end of the race, when Rob and Frank had to do the ice climbing, now granted, all they did was climb to the top and come back down and we left. So it wasn't really from point A to point B. It was point A to B back to A, but still it was kind of a mode of transportation, we could call it. And so the challenges had to do with how you were going to get through the race course.
Right, yeah. And when you arrived at the Leg 5 pit stop, you ended up in 4th place. Was that a surprise to you, knowing how far behind you thought you were and knowing that you had never seen any of the teams along the race course?
Yes. There were 2 different legs where we thought there was a possibility we were getting eliminated. And that was clearly one of them. Of course, some of the other teams, like Frank and Margarita and Lenny and Karen, they did the camel challenge at the same time. So they knew they weren't last, or they knew there was at least another team that hadn't checked in yet. When we got to the roadblock, we didn't see any other teams. We knew how lost we had been at the desert for a while. And so we thought there's a possibility that we could be the last team. When we got to the pit stop area, we could see Nancy and Emily and Kevin and Drew, or at least one of each of the team members, off in the distance. So we knew we certainly weren't in first place. Not that we ever thought we were, but we knew other teams were there. And so that's why you see me when we check in. I think I say something like, oh, we thought we were dead. And we really thought there was a good possibility that we were getting eliminated.
Welcome to Pavilion.
Thank you very much.
Run number 4.
All right.
Okay.
What a comeback,
Thank you,
dude.
God. Oh, we were so far behind all day long, we thought we were dead.
Thank you. Thank you.
And did you ever run out of gas with the car? Because you traveled a long distance, and from what I saw, there weren't that many gas stations in sight.
We did not run out, and clearly they had given us a lot of gas because Paul and Amy, as you know, they got eliminated that leg. They came in hours behind the other teams. So they were zigzagging in the desert for a long, long time, and they never ran out of gas either. So that was not a factor, luckily.
So leg 6, it was one of the most interesting legs in Amazing Race history, not just in the first race, and it involved the famous airport strike incident at the Tunisia airport. Kevin gave his perspective on the situation, and the Guidos talked about it a bit with me as well, but I want to get your take on what happened. How much pushing really happened at the departure gate, and was it as chaotic as it appeared on TV?
Pushing, I always thought, was a strong term, because when people hear the word push, they think of someone putting their hands on somebody and pushing them. That didn't happen. What happened was the Guidos knew that we were super close to our takeoff time. And we actually had the ticket agent walking us to the gate, and she was walking us through security. We were going to the front of the line, and they did what they did, where they tried to get in front of us and pretend they couldn't find their tickets. So we were trying to pass them because we had a woman leading us through to pass them. And so all they did is they just kind of got in the way. And so because we were being gentlemen, allowing Nancy and Emily to go first, Nancy was at the front of our line along with the ticket agent. And when they got in the way and all of a sudden everybody's trying to get through, there was some pushing in that you're in a big crowd, people are moving around, and one of Bill or Joe's backpacks probably kind of pushed up against Nancy, that kind of thing. I think that's probably where the term pushing came from. Now, the second half of your question, is it as crazy as it seemed? The answer to that's yes. It was very chaotic. Everybody's yelling. We're trying to get through. They're getting in the way. We're yelling at members of production that are on the side that, of course, you can't show that on TV because they're members of production. And the Tunisia airport police, or whatever you want to call them, showed up, and they literally had machine guns in their hands. So it was as crazy as it looked. Now, it all happened very quickly because, of course, we did make our flight, but it was very chaotic, and it was a big deal. I mean, we were obviously after that, as you saw on the end of that leg and the next leg, we were just pissed off at Joe and Bill. That was definitely the moment where the Guidos were 100% the villains.
I think it finally worked out, but we don't know. It's supposed to leave in like 30 minutes.
The flight leaves in 14 minutes.
And they're going to make a lot of noise going through customs. We'll see what happens.
Who has the tickets? Do they have the tickets? Drew, do you have the tickets?
Yeah, I got everything.
We have one more. We're missing one ticket.
We got 10 minutes.
We have the flight leaves in 2 minutes. I don't know how. 7 minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes. We're good.
They'll take us together. Should we all go together?
Ma'am, will they hold the plane for us? Will they hold the plane? Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Do we have what we need?
Yes, let's go.
We go?
The three teams, we ended up getting a really good flight out, and Bill and Joe saw that we got on a better flight than they did, and for some reason they just went nuts.
As we see them come, we're going to stop. Put your tickets away so you can't find them. It might even just be 1 or 2 minutes, so let's just hold them up. Okay, here they come. Okay, here they come.
Go ahead, Nance.
Here they come. Okay. Here they come. Here they come. Okay. Just wait right here. Okay. Avancez.
Excuse us, we got a flight to catch.
Avancez.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Excuse us, we got a flight.
Thank you so much.
We need the boarding pass.
I don't thank you.
What the hell are these guys doing?
What the hell are they doing?
No.
I was here before they were.
Joe and Bill are trying to pull us up. They're hacking on the cops. This is ridiculous.
You guys are going to get a punch in the face.
Hey.
Or arrested. Emily, here. Come with me.
Right here.
Okay, merci. Here you go. Emily, here.
They have tickets for this flight. They didn't have tickets for this flight.
They're not on tour.
It's just ridiculous.
I mean, security everywhere. They're pushing people, screaming.
They go so far as to step in front of Nancy and actually physically prevent her from moving. I mean, It's just ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, I'm real disappointed in them. I can see them doing that to other people, but not to my mom.
I mean,
Why didn't they push Rob or me or Kevin?
It's a really good question.
And they're probably scared of y'all.
Well, they should be now.
How long did they actually hold the plane for you?
It wasn't very long. I don't remember exactly, but I want to say it was only like 10 minutes or so. When we originally left the ticket counter, we actually thought we might make it on time. So the little bit of holdup didn't last a ton. But the fact that we had the ticket agent walking us in, she had obviously called ahead and say, hold this plane. We have 3 teams, each have a cameraman and a sound man. So you've got 12 people that need to get on board that flight. So that's why they did hold it for us for a bit.
It's interesting because now, of course, on the race, a lot of the times, as you mentioned before, the teams are given tickets or they're told which flights to go to. But one of my favorite parts of the Amazing Race of any leg is the actual airport situation where you have to find the flights, book the flights, maybe integrate with the other teams to help each other make the flights or try to avoid flights. And for anyone who thinks that airport drama isn't the best TV, I hope you go and watch leg 6 of the Amazing Race 1, because this is the quintessential example of how airport drama and airport situations really gets the viewer going when it comes to the Amazing Race. And I truly wish they would show that more on the current races, because it's probably some of the best footage you might get ever on the Amazing Race.
I agree, and I think the reason they don't do it anymore is because of costs. But I think they need to go back to the rule in our season, because it changed after our season. In our season, once you booked a flight, you had to take that flight. If you realized after you booked it that there was a better flight, nothing you can do about it. They changed that for future early seasons, we'll call them, to where you could book multiple flights. So you would get teams who would rack up $100,000 in ticket fees. Then, of course, they'd get refunded because they didn't take them all, but it was a huge deal for production. And now I think it's much cheaper for them to just say, here are the flights you're taking, and that's how they're saving some money. So I understand why they do it the way they do now, but hey, go back to the rules in our season. Once you book a flight, you got to take it. But I think the other thing they're afraid of with that is a team does book the wrong flight. They might end up hours behind, and then they're out, and that just makes for boring TV.
Or what they could do is, usually on the first leg, the clue would say you can only travel on one of these 2 flights or one of these 3 flights. Make it maybe that situation where you know that they're only going to be on 2 or 3 flights, but it's up to the team to figure out which flight leaves first, which flight arrives first. It's actually a race to the ticket counter, and it gives teams in the lead the option to actually stay in the lead rather than wasting that lead from the previous leg and being all bunched up when the leg hardly even started yet.
Yep, I agree. I think that would be fun, but nope, just task.
Exactly. Here we come up to another situation that involved penalties and an interesting dilemma. So you arrived in Rome, and after completing the detour, the clue told the teams to take a train to Castelfranco via Bologna. However, Joe and Bill and Frank and Margarita decided to take a cab to the Pagani Auto Factory from the Bologna train station, which was a violation of what the clue said. Now, both teams ended up getting a penalty, but I was wondering if you remember how long that penalty actually was.
Yeah, I believe the penalty was an hour. And to us, that made absolutely no sense. We definitely put our lawyer hats on and argued with production, because the problem was, once you got to the Pagani Auto Factory, it was first come, first served. So because they broke the rules and got there ahead of us, we sat there for probably an hour and a half before we actually got to perform the task. And of course, Kevin and Drew waited even longer, because I don't remember why we went first ahead of them, because we both took cabs. I guess our cab must have gotten there a little bit faster than them. But it made no sense to us that they could break the rules, get there first, make us wait, check in before us, and place first and second in the leg. Now, one of the things that they did not show starting the next leg is when they gave the penalties, Frank and Margarita ended up first. We ended up second. The Guidos ended up third. But I guess they just didn't want to explain that. So when we left on the next episode, they made it look like the Guidos were leaving second, even though they technically left third on the next leg. So the penalty was enough for us to leapfrog Joe and Bill, but we did not leapfrog Frank and Margarita. So we definitely were not happy that they cheated and still won the leg.
Right, because Phil said in a voiceover that despite the penalty, the place standings remained the same.
Yeah, which wasn't technically true, but in the end, the team that won still won.
Currently on the race, I know if that sort of situation occurs, the team receives a standard 30-minute penalty, plus a penalty for the difference in time the faster route took to get to the destination compared with the route they were required to take. Brad fact! So looking back, it's interesting to think about whether this penalty method would have resulted in a penalty time of more than an hour.
Well, I think the difference is also there's not many first come, first serve tasks anymore, because they know that those are boring because teams can't pass each other. Like, you think back to the sewer task. Oh, it seems cool. We were down in the sewers of Paris. They must be mazes, and whoever figures out their way first, they're going to be the best team. Well, that's not the way it worked. You went down in there. There was a rope you held on to, and you followed that rope from point A to point B. And so it was whoever went in first came out first. Whoever went in second came out second. And we're like, what kind of task is that? And so they just don't do those many first come, first served tasks anymore. So that was the problem with that. Like I said, they didn't follow the rules, and that allowed them to get there first. And the rest of us had to sit and wait while the front teams performed the task.
Do you think that leg 6 being a non-elimination leg is why the production team didn't put a huge emphasis on the penalty, because they knew no one was getting eliminated?
It could have been. I don't remember what it was, but Lenny and Karen had some kind of big production difficulty in that leg, and they got a huge time credit at the end. And I think that was another part of it where they knew it was going to be a non-elimination. And I think they even told Lenny and Karen that. I think Lenny and Karen were so upset when they had whatever their production issue was and they figured they're going to be last. I think they actually told them to calm them down, like, hey, this is a non-elimination leg. I could be wrong about that, but if I remember correctly, that's what they did. So I think they had enough issues on that leg that they're lucky it was a non-elimination leg. And so you're right, they just didn't emphasize it that much.
Well, that sounds pretty accurate because I remember when watching the leg, Karen was doing the roadblock to drive to the pit stop. And when she came there, she was yelling, yay, I made it. And then Lenny and Karen both smiling at the pit stop.
Yes. I remember when I watched the episode thinking exactly that. I'm like, oh, you're supposed to look disappointed, guys. So that's the reason I think that I remember that they did tell him.
Were you told specifically that there were going to be non-elimination legs, or did you just figure out, there's going to be 13 legs, so obviously there's going to be some non-elimination points?
I'm going to give you the same answer I did before about I can't remember if they told us that or if it had to do with that I learned through watching all the first few seasons, and that's where I learned. I feel like they had to have told us because I think we knew how many legs there were going to be. Or maybe we didn't. I honestly don't remember the answer to that, but I feel like we did know. And actually, I'm pretty sure we did because I know you as a viewer figured it out when they said, who will be eliminated tonight on elimination legs? And then they would say, who will come in last tonight?
Now, 5 teams remain. Who will come in last place tonight?
You knew it was going to be a non-elimination leg if you heard that at the beginning. And I think our clues said the last team to check in will be eliminated. And on the non-eliminations, I don't remember what it said, but it didn't say that. So we knew when a non-elimination was coming.
At the start of leg 7, a detour was the first clue shown, but typically teams have to travel somewhere first before a detour is presented. Did you have to travel to a destination before the detour and it was simply edited out? Because it looks like the teams opened up the detour envelope at a different location than the pit stop.
They did. The route information said something about finding a clock tower down the street. And that clock tower was literally 100 to 200 yards down the street. So it was like the shortest task in Amazing Race history. We went down to the clock tower, and at the clock tower is where the detour information was. So I'm sure what happened is when they started editing it together, they thought, well, that's boring. All they do is walk down the street to a clock tower. We might as well just edit that out. So that's what happened.
So you chose the glide detour. Now, how cool of an experience was it riding in a glider?
It was fun. I remember even thinking to myself, I'm going to be ready for this to be over so we can move on with the race, but there's nothing I can do up there, so you might as well enjoy it. It was a lot of fun. It was the feeling of a lot of amusement park rides. He'd go up and he'd do dives, so kind of like being on a roller coaster going down a hill. He'd do spins, like some of the rides where you might feel a little bit sick. And as a matter of fact, I did. Yeah, I kind of got a little bit nauseous from him going so hard in the spins and all that. So that was a lot of fun. And like I said, I remember, okay, Brennan, enjoy this because there's no racing you can do right now. And this is probably the only time in your life you're going to be in a glider. And like I said before, when my dad asked the question about how many modes of transportation did you take, I certainly included that because you're in a glider and that's different than a regular airplane. But all we did was take off and land in the same place.
So the next destination was the Red Fort in Delhi, India, which was a true culture shock for all of the teams. First of all, a lot of the legs in season 1 involved traveling midway. So you would do one task in one destination and then fly and then do another task before the pit stop in the next destination, where now it's cut and dry. It's either travel, task, pit stop, or find out that they're staying in the same destination for the leg, task, pit stop. So do you think traveling to a new destination midway through a leg added to more stress and competition between the teams? Because you knew there weren't that many tasks remaining before the pit stop.
I always go back to why did they do it then? Why do they do it the way they do now? And obviously they do it the way they do now because viewers would learn that, wow, there's probably going to be a bunching point at an airport. So the tasks might not mean anything at the beginning of the leg. So I think that's why they do it the way they do now. But on the flip side, just like you said, we would know, hey, we just did a task or two before we even went to the airport. Now we're all bunched together. We're on the same flight. There's only going to be one, maybe two things when we get there. And so we're going to have to make sure we do those things as fast as possible. If you make any kind of mistakes, you could be out.
And traveling to India as a whole and visiting the Red Fort specifically, this was the first true culture shock the teams faced in Amazing Race history. So, Brennan, describe the atmosphere you experienced when seeing the mobs of people at Delhi's Red Fort.
It was absolute culture shock. None of the other legs can even compare. First leg, you're going to Zambia, which is a third world country, and there was a lot of poverty there, but still not a lot of culture shock. India was like no place I had ever been. And I always tell people India is the closest thing to another planet is us. And the best example I always give on that is I've now been to over 40 countries, and every country other than India, you shake your head, it means no. You nod your head, it means yes. In India, they do this different kind of head bobbing thing. And that's what got Nancy and Emily into trouble when they finished that roadblock and had to go to the Taj Mahal Hotel. And they would ask people if they knew where it was. They kind of did the head bob, and it almost looked like they were nodding. Or were they shaking their head? Yeah, you didn't know. And so their personal space is different. They stand much closer. They stare. Their culture is just different. For example, if you're at a stoplight here and you're looking at the person next to you and they look over at you, you look away. In India, they don't. And it's just cultural. It's just cultural differences. And so those cultural differences just made for absolute culture shock. And going back to what you asked, it was also just the amount of people, the amount of things on the road, meaning you're in a car and there are motorcycles, there are pedicabs, there are elephants, there are camels, there are cows just laying around, there's all kinds of animals, there's people walking, there's bicycles, and it was just absolute madhouse. And it really, really made those two legs in India by far the most difficult of the race.
Another question that I asked Kevin that I thought would also be a great question to ask you is, during the 8th leg, teams had to travel from Agra, India to Jaipur, India, which was 150 miles away by either taxi or bus. And then after the detour, you had to travel from Jaipur to Bikaner by train, which was another 200 miles. So you were traveling over 350 miles in the span of just 3 route markers. Now, a constant trend of season 1 was traveling long distances on single legs, even when you were staying in one country. And currently on The Amazing Race, there are legs when there really isn't a lot of long distance traveling aside from airplane flights. So do you think the racers from the current seasons have it a bit easier when it comes to single leg traveling?
Absolutely. As we've been rehashing over and over, the race used to be about travel, now it's about tasks. So for sure, from the travel aspect of it, there's not a lot of skill, I guess we'll say, involved with that. It's more about performing the tasks correctly, reading your clue to make sure that you're doing exactly what the clue says on a task-by-task basis. And as much as it may have been harder for us from the travel aspect, it certainly is more difficult now for a lot of the tasks. I mean, there have been tasks on later races that are certainly way harder than anything we did on The Amazing Race, period.
Rob mentioned in a confessional at the start of leg 8 that he didn't see you and him making the final leg.
Our route marker is located somewhere on the grounds of the Taj Mahal. Find it.
No money for this leg?
No money.
Okay. I think that we're in a precarious situation right now. We're 3 of 5, but we've already used our fast forward. So as much as I think we have the ability to make it to the final round, if I had to guess right now, I'd say I don't think we're going to be there.
Do you think he was saying that because he thought the race was getting more difficult, or because your performance in the last few legs wasn't as strong as the beginning legs of the race?
I think it definitely had to do with how we had performed the last few legs. What's interesting now is looking back on the race, we obviously were one of the strongest teams. And when you saw how similar teams to us did in the next few races, I mean, it's obvious that we did have an advantage when it came to physical tasks, we'll say. But neither one of us were very well traveled. So we felt, because it was a travel show, that we were going to be at a disadvantage. As a matter of fact, looking back on it now, who would have ever picked Dave and Margaretta to win? Nobody. But because we found out that Dave was a Vietnam fighter pilot and both of them had traveled a ton, we actually thought they were going to be one of the stronger competitors because we just didn't know how many tasks there would be. So obviously, when Rob says that, we're 8 legs in. So at that point, we do know. But we just never felt like we were the strongest team. And because we had performed badly in the last few legs, yeah, I think Rob's probably hedging his bets a little bit. We knew by that point we were one of the stronger teams, but because we've been performing badly, all it takes is one mistake. And so I'm sure in his mind, he thought, yeah, it'll look better if I say we're going to get out and we get out versus saying, oh, yeah, we're definitely going to be one of the final 3 teams. And then we get cut, you know?
Well, when you mentioned Dave and Margaretta, it's interesting because now you hardly see any of the quote-unquote older teams represented. And back at the start of the race, because it was more about the travel aspect and not necessarily these over-the-top challenging challenges, you could feature those teams because it was more of an even playing field when it came to the task. But now it's sad that we don't get a bigger range of participants because of the fact that it's more about these tasks, and physically speaking, the younger people are going to do better.
Just what you said at the end, that's the problem. And you're right. It's a reality show. You want to take a full cross section of the American society. But just from having done enough of the first 8, 9, 10 races, they realize those types of teams in the end just don't have a chance. And I'm surprised they haven't really tried to find the 60-somethings that are Ironman participants or something, and maybe they could. But that goes back to what I said before when you asked the question about whether Rob and I would be cast now. Like I said, we're in our late 40s. We'd be one of the older teams now. And I think we would still be a very strong team, but it's not quite the same as when they cast a full cast of 20-somethings.
The roadblock on leg 8 was a very interesting one. It took place at the Karni Mata Temple in Deshnook, India, and it involved one team member finding the next clue, but it was hidden in the temple full of sacred rats. Now, first of all, when you arrived at the temple and you saw hundreds and hundreds of people worshiping these rats, what were your initial thoughts? And then what was it like actually going through the temple to try to find the clue?
I think they showed it on the episode. We knew what we were getting into. We knew this was going to be a temple full of rats. So we'd kind of already gotten over the initial shock of if there are going to be a bunch of rats when you get in there.
Now teams are on their way to the train station in the city of Bikaner. There, they must find transportation to the sacred temple of rats in the town of Deshnook.
Yo, guys, just when you thought you've seen it all, Karni Devi Temple, famous haven of rats. So I'm like, what's this about rats? So I asked the kid next to me, he goes, there's so many rats that you can't pick your feet up when you walk. You have to slide your feet.
I ain't going. I ain't going. I'm not doing it.
I just thought I'd share this with you because, I don't like rats. Yo. This guy told me hundreds and thousands of rats.
I once was working in the South Bronx. I got out of my car, I stepped on a tire. Rats came out everywhere from the tires.
Those aren't sacred rats.
They're sacred religious rats.
Doesn't matter. Rat is a rat is a rat. You're up for the next roadblock anyway.
Oh, God.
Joe and Bill, what do you think?
You can do it? That's my girl. All right.
Hey, Drew, do you live in India or what?
At the same time, I also thought to myself, because people think, oh, rats, maybe they're going to bite or something like that. I figured there's no way they're sending a bunch of Indians into this place every time they're going to worship and they're all going to get bitten. So I figured they kind of had to be, maybe we'll call them tame rats. So I really wasn't that worried from this is going to be a difficult task standpoint. At the same time, it was really interesting seeing the people and, getting ready to go in. They all started lining up pre-dawn and just thinking there's another difference between India and us in the US. It was just kind of crazy to think that they're going into a place where they think these are sacred rats. And of course, we all know that in Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation. So crazy to think that. But at the same time, we all tried to be respectful of their beliefs and just kind of get the task done. And in the end, we also knew that the Guidos and Nancy and Emily hadn't made our train. And I think we knew it was going to be a non-elimination leg. So we probably went into that roadblock with the least amount of worry. That one wasn't very frantic, is probably the best way to put it.
At the start of leg 9, there was a bonus scene on the DVD that showed you and Rob getting into an argument over cabs at the pit stop with Kevin and Drew. Not much of it was shown, but I was wondering if this took place before your pit stop departure, or did it take place after your pit stop departure? Because it seemed like Kevin and Drew had their bags on a cab, and you and Rob thought it was your cab because you ordered one.
So it happened before we left. And the reason it happened, and it's funny because as close as Kevin and I are, this is one we still argue about if it comes up. What happened was that was one of the pit stops where there's supposed to be 12 hours. We ended up there for 60 hours. They had some production difficulties, so they extended it for 2 days. There have been plenty over the years where they've extended it by a day, like a 36-hour pit stop. But this one was, I think, probably the longest ever. It was definitely the longest of our race. And we didn't know they were going to extend it an extra day after they extended it the first day. So we had called ahead for our cab driver. Our cab driver showed up. We talked to him, let him know, hey, we've got to go check out whatever we have to do. And then we're going to put our bags in your cab. So we'll come back over. So we'd already talked to him. Then they tell us, we got to extend it for another day. So what happened was Kevin and Drew, Rob and Brennan, and Frank and Margarita, all three of us all called ahead for cabs. So when only 2 cabs showed up, Our argument was, well, we met our cab driver yesterday, so this is definitely ours. But of course, Kevin and Drew were leaving first because they had won the leg before. So they're like, well, there's only 2 cabs. We're first. We should get one of them. And I honestly don't remember what Frank and Margarita's argument was, why they got it. Maybe because when the cab showed up, they immediately went and put their bags in it or something like that. But that's why there was a huge argument. It was all 3 of us called cabs. Only 2 showed up. Kevin and Drew are leaving first. We should get the cab. And our argument was, well, we met our cab driver the day before. So when he showed up, he's definitely ours.
Was that tough being at a pit stop for 60 hours because you're in this competitive mode and now you're getting down to the nitty gritty? There's not that many legs left, not that many teams left. And the momentum just dies when you stay at a pit stop for so long. Was that one of the downfalls, you think, of the first race in terms of the competitive nature of it? Because even though we as a viewer don't see it, as a competitor, there's so much delay and that momentum really draws you down.
It was really the exact opposite. If you ask any of the final 5 teams that were all at that pit stop, I would be surprised if any of them said that that was not one of their favorite parts of the race. And the reason is we're staying at this really nice hotel. We can eat whatever we want. We can drink whatever we want. And that really is where some of the teams bonded. We became really close to Kevin and Drew and Nancy and Emily during that time because you have nothing to do. You can't leave the palace. You just got to hang out. And it was just a great downtime because it had been so frantic. And you knew there's nothing you can do. When you're racing the entire time, you just have knots in your stomach. And all the time you're nervous, you're anxious. And when you know there's nothing you can do, of course, like I said, it was only for 36 hours, then another 24 hours. You're just kind of hanging out, chilling. And you know that when it's time to race again, you're going to get back into race mode. The anxious knots are going to come back and you'll be ready to go. So it was a great rest. And the biggest part about it was a great time to get to know the other teams.
And then you had to travel to Thailand for leg 9, and the pit stop was at the Tiger Cave Temple in Krabi, and an interesting situation occurred. So Joe and Bill won the fast forward, but decided to take a bus instead of a cab, so they arrived hours after the 4 teams checked in. However, Nancy and Emily decided to not complete the detour, which it was another task where it was just about choosing which mode of travel to actually use to get to the next location, which was the roadblock. But I'm curious if you remember how long the difference was between Nancy and Emily's arrival compared to Joe and Bill's, because now the penalty for not completing the detour is only 6 hours instead of 24 hours. So I was curious if the time difference by today's race rules would have made a difference between whether they were eliminated or not.
I don't think it would have made a difference. I think it was less than 6 hours. I don't remember exactly because we were asleep. So that was another leg. We didn't think we were last, but what we did is we actually went for the private car as well at first. And the private car, of course, is what was the doom for Kevin and Drew. That's why they took so long. That's what Nancy and Emily couldn't find, so they gave up. We started to look for that. We spent maybe 20 minutes on it, realized this is just too much of a risk, and we chose to do the bus instead. Then once we finished the Tiger task, we luckily at that point had saved up a lot of money. So we were like, do we take a cab? Do we take a train? We immediately thought, we have enough money. Let's just get in a car and go. So when we got down there, because we had taken a little bit of time looking for the private car, and because we knew that one of the teams was going to be going for the fast forward, we figured we'd be 4th maybe. So when we checked in first, we were dumbfounded. And one of the production guys, all he told us was some huge mistakes have been made. That's all we got from him. So we waited and waited and waited. Frank and Margarita came in about an hour after us. The 4 of us were showed to where we slept. Kevin and Drew eventually checked in. I don't think we were asleep yet, but we were close to it. Then we all went to sleep and were woken up at some point by Nancy and Emily basically telling us the story of what had happened. So I don't remember exactly how far apart they were, but it definitely was less than 6 hours. Like I said, Frank and Margarita, the second place team, who did things well and did things quickly, they still were an hour behind us. And I think the problem with that task, as they have learned to redo race routes, is it was just too far from the Tiger task to Krabi. I want to say it was like a 6, 7, maybe even longer hour cab ride. I mean, when we always say a cab, it's like a car. We hired like a van to take us down there. And the problem with that is car gets lost a little bit, or one just goes a lot faster than another. And so I think Frank and Margarita did their tasks pretty quickly as well, but they still ended up an hour behind us. Then you get Kevin and Drew not being able to find the private car. They took a few hours trying to find it, so they end up several hours behind us. And then Nancy and Emily, they can't find the private car, so they give up, not knowing that the Guidos were going to make the dumbest mistake ever. Well, I guess not the dumbest mistake ever because they stayed in the race, but in the end, it cost them any chance to win.
Yeah, I believe it was 500 miles, and that was one of the reasons why the Guidos didn't take a cab, because the locals said it's too far to travel by cab.
Yeah, and the other problem for them is they didn't have much money. If you remember on one of the India legs, they were really worried they weren't even able to get on the train because they weren't going to have enough money. And Rob and I had been scrimping as much as possible, and we, by that point in the race, had plenty of money. So that's why our choice was immediately take a car.
So leg 10 continued in Thailand, and this is where the race really separated. So you knew that Joe and Bill were hours behind, but because of the operating hours at Sealand and Trek, Kevin and Drew lost a lot of ground, and now they were half a day behind as well. Was this the point where you started to gain confidence to assume that you and Rob would be racing in the final 3?
For sure. Because we're now 10 legs in, we understood how bunching worked. We understood why it worked, because a lot of viewers get frustrated by bunching. And obviously, there's 2 reasons for it. One is they want to keep the race close. But secondly, even if it had nothing to do with keeping the race close, like in other words, if it wasn't something that was aired on TV and it was just some event people could sign up for, when you show up to go ring the bell at Notre Dame at 2 a.m., you're not going into Notre Dame. You've got to wait till it opens at, say, 8 a.m. in the morning. And so it really was something that they had to do. And they just took advantage of that to be able to keep the teams close. So we had done it long enough that we knew how it was going to work. And I guess in our lawyer minds, we kind of did the math and realized as they were starting a leg, they're not going to be able to finish this leg. They're going to now have to wait till the next day. We had already done the math and figured out that they were going to end up 24 hours behind us.
Do you think in the first season, the producers thought that a 24-hour gap wasn't a big deal because the race exemplified what could happen when traveling around the world? People could miss a timed train or people could get lost for a long time. Or do you think the producers were hoping such a large gap wouldn't happen, but in the end it ultimately did?
My guess is they didn't want that to happen. My guess is they just didn't realize that private car task was going to be so difficult, or that the Guidos were going to make the mistake they made. And I don't think they wanted anybody to be 24 hours behind, because they knew that in the last episode, you want 3 teams racing to the finish line altogether.
Right, yeah. And I think that was one of the purposes of a final 3, because if there was a final 2 and a situation like that happened, obviously we know who's going to win.
Right. And you know better than me, but I think it's only seasons 1 and 4 where a team ended up that far behind at the end. Is that correct?
At the end, yeah. We had the situation in All-Stars where the Guidos got into a deja vu moment where they were so far behind.
But they got eliminated, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They ended up getting eliminated. But in terms of the final 3, it was just the Guidos and then David and Jeff in season 4. Brad fact!
Right. And so that just shows how good production is. They figured it out to where it only happened in 2 of the first 4 seasons and it's never happened again. So yeah, that's definitely something. I think even from the beginning, they didn't want that.
Moving on to leg 11, the first clue was to fly to Beijing, China. And in order to get to Beijing, you first had to travel to Phuket to take a flight to Bangkok and then go on to Beijing. But at the Phuket airport, you had just missed an 8:30 flight that would have ultimately helped you get into Beijing by 4:30 p.m. that day. So if you would have made that flight, you possibly could have completed the leg before Kevin and Drew and Team Guido even started leg 11.
Thank you. There's a Bangkok at 8:30.
There's a what?
There was a Bangkok flight on time at 8:30.
Bless it. That sucks. Maybe we can make it.
Over there, international departures.
We need to book a ticket. Is it gone? God, I can't believe we missed that flight. Ugh. That's gonna haunt me, dude. It's gonna haunt me. Hey, you ready to kick yourself? We missed an 8:20 flight to Bangkok. There was an 11:05 flight in Bangkok that put us in at China at 4:30. And we missed an 8:20 flight here to get to Bangkok to get on that.
So was it a disappointing factor knowing that you could have had even a greater lead than you already had? Or were you thinking, oh, we still have such a big lead, this really doesn't matter?
It was very disappointing. Like I said, we had kind of figured out that they were going to end up well behind us. But at the same time, who knows? Maybe they make some kind of change so they can catch up or whatever it was. You always want to get further ahead. And I think they even show Rob in the episode saying to Frank, that's going to haunt us. We knew we were within minutes of getting on that flight. And that really assured ourselves of being the top 2 teams.
If that happened, you might have actually crossed the finish line before the Guidos even started the final leg.
Yeah. Maybe we would have won by 2 days instead of 1.
Oh, man. We would have won by 2 days. So in Beijing, you participated in the first ever Amazing Race Eating Challenge to actually air on TV. Of course, as many fans know, on leg 1, there was the ostrich egg eating challenge that never went aired, but leg 11 featured the first aired eating challenge, and you actually took part and had to eat a squid, 2 chicken feet, and 5 beetle larvae for the roadblock. So I'm curious, Brennan, was the food even the slightest bit tasty?
That's a good question. The answer really is no. The squid that we had, Rob and I grabbed the wrong kind of squid. Other people grabbed just raw squid. Somehow we ended up with dehydrated, almost like squid jerky. So when they made it, they kind of rehydrated in whatever oil they cooked it in. And so that had really no taste to it, which I'll take no taste over something bad. The beetle larvae, that didn't have much taste to it either. It was more about the texture. It was like chewing soft sandpaper and it went down pretty rough. And then the chicken's feet is just what you'd expect because there's not much meat on the actual feet. So you're basically just kind of eating like chicken skin and cartilage. So that was kind of nasty, but none of them were tasty, but none of them were terrible as you might expect for eating challenges on reality shows.
Do you think production thought that there was only one type of squid to get and then they realized, oh, there's another type of squid?
Yeah, my guess is they meant for us to get the other. And actually, we all say squid because that's what we know in America, but it was technically called a kettlefish, which is some type of squid. And so if that's the Chinese symbol for kettlefish, as long as we got the right one, I think it was fine, even though I don't think they expected us to end up with that. I do remember when the show aired, the teams that were rooting for Frank and Margarita or Kevin and Drew or Team Guido, I saw them complaining on some of the message boards that we got the wrong thing and should have been penalized. But in the end, it was still a kettlefish.
Every nitpicky thing to be penalized for.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you placed second at the pit stop, only 11 minutes behind Frank and Margarita. Now, out of the remaining 2 teams, Team Guido and Kevin and Drew, was there one that you were hoping would place third and make it to the finale, or did it not really matter because you knew that they were so far behind and thought maybe they're not even going to catch up?
No, we definitely wanted Kevin and Drew. First of all, we liked Kevin and Drew better. But on the second hand, even though they both were good racing teams, obviously, because they're in the final 4, we knew the Guidos were the better competition from a racing standpoint. Kevin might not like to hear me say that, but overall, they were the more consistent team, we'll say. So we were definitely disappointed.
When did you find out that Joe and Bill had made the final 3 and not Kevin and Drew? Because you were scheduled to depart for the 12th leg before either of them had finished the 11th leg.
Oh, so what happened was that was another 36-hour pit stop. So we were just hanging out in the lobby of our hotel because we knew when they were going to be finishing the eating challenge. We knew what time we checked in the day before. So Frank and Margarita and Rob and I were hanging out in the lobby waiting for a team to come in. And we were definitely disappointed when Joe and Bill came in and not Kevin and Drew.
Oh, so you did know who actually did make it because it was a longer than 12-hour pit stop.
That's right, we did.
During the first non-elimination leg, which occurred during leg 6, Phil explained to Lenny and Karen, who arrived last, that there would be 3 predetermined non-elimination legs on the race. However, that information was clearly an inserted voiceover, so I was wondering if you were told before the race started that there would be 4 non-elimination legs, because in reality, the 12th leg was the 4th non-elimination leg, and if you possibly knew why the audience was told that there were only 3 non-elimination legs.
I don't know whether that was a production decision or if right from the beginning they considered the final 2 legs to be really one leg with, I don't know, we'll call it halftime in between. I'm not sure on the answer to that. I don't know why they did it that way. It probably was a production decision later once they realized that nobody's really getting non-eliminated at the end of that leg because the Guidos are so far behind.
Right, because Amazing Race 2, it was the same structure where the second to last leg was a non-elimination leg, but they did say that there were 4 non-elimination legs across the race route. Brad fact!
Yeah, then that probably solidifies that theory.
So during leg 12, you completed a detour at the Great Wall of China and received a route marker to travel to Alaska. Now, the clue specifically said, and we actually see it on the camera, to travel to Scotty Lake, Alaska. So did you have to research that Anchorage was where you had to fly to, or was this information told to you by production since it didn't say it in the clue?
We had to research it. I don't know how much research there was. I think even though none of us had been to Alaska, you realize that you're probably flying into Anchorage because it's the largest city. Of course, there are other cities you can fly into. So if I remember correctly, we did have to figure out where Scotty Lake was before knowing that we had to fly into Anchorage.
Go ahead. Which country? That's the only thing I
They're expected at North Country Bed and Breakfast, Scotty Lake, Alaska.
Alaska, baby.
We didn't think of that one.
Stateside.
Teams must now travel more than 4,000 miles to Anchorage, Alaska, then take a 2-hour drive to this bed and breakfast inn on Scotty Lake.
And Rob mentioned that you didn't expect to be traveling to Alaska. Did you expect there to be another international destination before traveling back to the States? And were you told that the race was going to end in the United States?
I don't remember whether they told us that or not. I think we did know that, or at least assumed it. But I think we knew that there were a couple legs left, and we figured they wouldn't go to the U.S. until the very final leg. So our guess, of course, they hit it in season 2, but we were guessing we were going to go to Brazil and maybe see the Christ the Redeemer statue or something like that. Because we knew, okay, we're in Asia. We've got to head back towards the U.S. Maybe we'll go to South America because we haven't hit that yet. And it'll be more spectacular if we hit more continents. And so that was our guess of where we were going next. It hadn't even entered our mind that we could be going to Alaska. And so that's why Rob said that we didn't think about that. Because we certainly, at that point in the race, were really trying to think ahead to think of where we might be going. In the end, even if we knew, it doesn't do you any good, but it's still fun to strategize and think you're playing the race.
Especially since you're on the first ever race and you don't have any background information to base your predictions on.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know. And we just figured, okay, there's 2 legs left. We're not going to the U.S. till the final leg. Got to be going someplace else international.
Getting a flight to Anchorage was a bit of a struggle, but you eventually got a flight from Beijing to San Francisco to Seattle to Anchorage. And knowing how difficult it was for you and Rob to get a flight, were you surprised that Frank and Margarita were able to get on the exact same flights and even got better seats than you from Seattle to Anchorage?
So here's another behind the scenes. They originally did not get on the same flights as us. So when we went into the airport in Beijing, and Rob and I paid for coach going first class from Beijing to San Francisco, the connection was going to be from San Francisco to Anchorage. But it was a long connection. So I asked the woman, I said, hey, is there anything that can get us there faster? And she said, yep, we can do San Francisco to Seattle to Anchorage. So we did that. And Frank and Margarita did not. I forget how they figured out that that's what we were doing, but they made that change when they got to San Francisco. And so somehow because of that, that's how they ended up with better seats than us. Maybe some seats had opened up or something like that by the time they booked it, but that's why they ended up with better seats. We actually did the smarter move by figuring out that, hey, maybe there's something faster, asked the ticket agent, got the better flights, and then they ended up mimicking us. And remember I told you earlier that one of the rules on our race was that you couldn't change your flights. So we were not happy. And we complained to production about it, but they let it slide. And I'm sure in their minds, it's because they wanted us to be neck and neck. But that's what actually happened.
Hello. We were trying to get to Anchorage, Alaska in the United States.
I think you should transfer.
Okay. Transfer on which airlines? Because we're trying to get there as soon as possible. If we have to take 3 different airlines, that's fine.
Yes.
Today.
Okay, I booked for you.
Okay. So we would leave at 1:45, Beijing to San Francisco, then San Francisco to Seattle, and then Seattle to Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, get some seats on that one, baby.
You know, if you select this routing from Beijing to San Francisco, you should just have a business seats available. Economy, no seats.
Oh, no seats?
Oh.
There are no seats at all?
No, have a business seats.
But no, we can't fly business class. There's no economy seats?
From the computer, no.
No, is there any way that you can bump people up to business class and put us in economy? Because we really need to get on this flight. It's very important that we get to Anchorage as soon as possible.
We just need to try to explain how important it is that she try to bump other passengers to business class.
All right, let's see what she's got this time. It's like playing the lottery. And these all have seats on them?
Yeah.
We think we've done pretty well with the flights. We got here early ahead of Frank and Margarita, and we don't think that anything better can be done. So we're going to book it, make sure we have our seats and get away from here so Frank and Margarita don't see exactly what we're doing. I'm sure they'll get here in time to at least figure out this flight. Whether there'll be seats available at that time, we'll find out.
Well, you were neck and neck with Frank and Margarita throughout the entire 12th leg, and then during the final leg, Frank and Margarita were literally right by your side during the dog sled detour. Now, you were able to finish that detour first and gained a bit of a lead heading into the roadblock at Fish Lake. and the roadblock required you to retrieve your next clue by jumping into the cold lake water. But to me, it didn't really seem too bad because all you had to do was jump out and retrieve the clue. But you thought that you only had to jump in the water and come back out. So did you know that the clue was actually out in the lake, or you just forgot that you actually had to get a clue?
No, I hadn't forgot, but I did not know it was on the other side. So the clue said that we had to jump in, we had to submerge our head. And what I thought was going to happen is I jump in, I submerge my head, I get out, and then I get a clue. Maybe somebody hands it to me, or I run back up to where we had changed and somebody hands me the clue. I just figured once I perform the task, someone's going to give me a clue. I just didn't see it on the other side. And so when I got out, I don't remember if it was Rob, or I wouldn't think it was somebody from production, but somebody yelled to me that the clue's on the other side. Must have been Rob. There's another first season teammate helping during a roadblock, but that's why you see me after I get out, I turn around and I go, oh, like that. It's because I'm like, oh, it's on the other side. I got to jump back in. Hopefully Rob would have been smart enough not to yell if that was a rule. And then I probably would have figured it out fairly quickly, but I definitely would have lost a little bit of time there.
Yeah, maybe this is it.
Fish Lake, I think. Is that
Fish Lake? Yeah.
Right. So there's the route marker.
I knew we'd be doing this. I knew we'd be doing this.
He actually did say
I
that
actually made
before.
this call.
It's a roadblock. Yep. And it's my turn, dude.
In this roadblock, one team member will have to participate in what is an annual tradition among many Native Alaskans. That person will have to strip down and plunge into this frigid 40-degree water. They must completely submerge their heads in order to finish the roadblock and receive the next clue.
Well, it's Brennan's turn, and he already decided to do it, so I'll read it for him. Strip to your underwear or put on a bathing suit and take a quick dip in some Alaskan water. I knew we'd be doing this, dude. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. All right, buddy. Great job.
All right, I'll be back.
Aaron, towels on.
All right, here goes nothing. Woo! Ah! Woo! Shrinkage! There you go.
When you opened up the route info and you read that you had to fly to New York City and travel to 51st and Roosevelt in Queens, which was literally where Frank and Margarita lived, what were you and Rob's initial reactions?
We knew we were at a disadvantage. We thought, because of course the race has been about figuring out how to get to places, we're going to be at a huge disadvantage. Rob even says in one of the episodes, why can't this thing end in Hollywood? Because we lived in West Hollywood at the time. So we knew that we were going to have to be on our A game because it was going to be difficult for them being able to maybe not know exactly where a clue is going to be, but at least knowing generally the area.
You have retrieved some freezing route information.
Yep, I have.
Dry off, put your clothes back on. Take a plane to New York City. Hail a cab and head for the route marker at Vincent Daniels Square. We're getting on a flight.
Well, it's interesting because now the race either starts, ends, or both starts and ends in Los Angeles.
I know there's definitely seasons where I've watched that. And I'm like, oh man, that would be such an advantage. At the same time, the way they do things nowadays, because it is more like we've talked about the tasks, I don't think it would be as much of an advantage. But some of the seasons that have started in LA, now I've been in LA for 22 years and I've been to the airport hundreds of times. So I know exactly how to get there.
You already performed a detour and a roadblock during the leg. So did you figure there wouldn't be too many more destinations before the finish line?
Yeah, we knew at that point that there couldn't be much left. And I thought to myself, there's a chance this thing could end in a foot race. I knew more likely than not we were going to beat them in a foot race. And I actually thought to myself, obviously I wanted to win, but I was like, that doesn't sound like a good way to win the race or for the race to end. But I knew at that point that there wasn't going to be much left.
Now, whose idea was it to ask someone to borrow the cell phone on your way to the airport?
That was my idea. There's so many things on the race I look back on where, because I was driving, Rob's the one that went in and did it. So, of course, Rob got the credit for it, but it was my idea.
We're going to their hometown. So they've already got a big advantage over us. You know, we might have to use any possible advantage we can get.
Excuse me, sir. Emergency, no time to explain. I would give you $300 to use your cell phone for the rest of the day. Yeah, if I can book a flight better, get a better flight.
and I'll give you $300. $300 if I could take your cell phone. I need to book a flight on the way to the airport. It's a life or death situation. I need to be able to use a cell phone on the way to the airport. You can call me on it in a day and I'll mail it back to you. No, how do I work it?
Dial?
Nice to meet you. Call me in a day or two and I'll mail it back to you. Let's go. Yes, hi. I'm trying to get from Anchorage to New York City as fast as possible. Either, LaGuardia, JFK, or Newark. Just whatever will get me out of Anchorage and there the fastest. And this is an Alaska airline to Seattle. 9:55 to Newark at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Well, is it possible for me to reserve these seats? And, that'd be a wonderful thing.
So what happened was, like I mentioned before, we were very good at saving our money. We had over $1,000 saved at that point, and we just thought, how can we use this money to our advantage? And most of the time we knew we would end up on the same flight as the other team, but we thought, you know what, you've got to get to the airport, run to the ticket counter, then talk to a ticket agent to try and figure it out. So we thought, well, if there's a flight that's leaving within 15 minutes of us getting to the airport, we could have an advantage that we've already booked it by the time we get there. So that's why we decided to stop and buy somebody's cell phone.
Was it disappointing when you found out that Frank and Margarita had made the same flight as you and Rob after coming up with a genius plan to borrow someone's ultra high-tech 2001 cell phone for $300 to book airline tickets from?
In the end, it wasn't that big a deal. We kind of knew that was going to happen because, like I said, unless the flight was leaving immediately, we knew they'd probably end up on the same flight. So now I think we liked the fact that we took the shot, didn't work out. And maybe you're going to ask, but everybody always does, did we send the cell phone back to her? And the answer is yes. It died, so we had to go buy a charger, charge the cell phone, and then we got in contact with her, and we did send it back to her.
When you arrived at Vincent Daniels Square, did you think you were in first place, or you thought Frank and Margarita must have arrived before because they know how to get here?
So one of the things we learned is you count the clues, and we knew there were 3 clues, so we had a good idea that we were in first. At the same time, why were there 3 clues? Why weren't there only 2 clues? Because we knew the Guidos were 24 hours behind. So maybe they put an extra clue in there. Then we thought, well, maybe Frank and Margarita got here. They already took their clue and they just refilled it because they knew we counted clues. So our first instinct was, hey, we're probably the first ones here because there are 3 clues. But then we thought, if production's smart, they just throw another clue in there to throw us off. And maybe Frank and Margarita already got here and left. So that was our thinking.
What number is this? It's 51st.
There it is.
This light here, make a left. Like 7 blocks.
All right, we're gonna hop out here and let's hop out. We'll be back with you soon.
Dude, this was non-stop. There's no way they could have beat us.
There is an elevated train station adjacent to this park. Use it. Take the 7 train to the Willets Point Shea Stadium stop. Follow the signs to Flushing Meadows Park. One of the yellow flags to the finish line. Right. Elevated train station adjacent to the park. Use it. Let's go.
Elevated. It's right up there.
We got everything?
We got everything. Got everything?
It's elevated train, right?
Elevated. This is elevated right over here. Come on. Hey, is this the elevated train station?
Turn right here. I need you to open the door for me.
I need tickets to this stop. The 7 train to Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
There's an elevated train station adjacent to the park. Use it. Shea Stadium!
Let's go! Let's go!
You know where this is?
We gotta go. Here. Here's $100.
Why? The train's coming. Come on.
Right here. No, right here. Mars, leave your back there.
Hey, is this the 7 train over here? Come on, train. Here it comes.
Come on, train. Come on, train.
You made your way to the platform of the 7 train to travel to the finish line at the Unisphere in Flushing Meadows Park. And I remember you mentioned on the DVD commentary that the train arrived within a minute of you getting on the platform. But I want to know, how nerve-wracking was it waiting for the train to arrive in the station since you didn't see Frank and Margarita?
Super nerve-wracking because when you get up there and you're the only ones on the platform, even if the train's already coming around the bend, that's why you hear us yelling, come on, train, because we just wanted it to get there because we didn't want to see Frank and Margarita come running up the stairs and get on the train with us. So, yeah, I mean, just as nerve-wracking as you can possibly imagine.
And then one of my favorite moments from the finale is when you and Rob just start asking every single person you see after getting off the 7 train Flushing Meadows Park, is it this way? Flushing Meadows Park, is it this way?
Which side's Flushing on? This side. That's it right there, isn't it? I recognize it from watching the U.S. Open. So if we go down right here? Okay.
Flushing Meadows Park. Flushing Meadows Park and go this way. To the right. Are you showing everybody first? To the right.
Keep asking. Flushing Meadows Park. Okay, standing this way. Up here. Flushing Meadows Park. Which way to Flushing Meadows? That way. Flushing Meadows. Flushing Meadows Park. Flushing Meadows.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the joke, of course, is always that typically men are always afraid to ask directions because they want to figure it out on their own. And there certainly were times in the race where you might think, all right, we don't need somebody's help, or maybe somebody might direct us in the wrong way. So let's just figure it out. But at that point, you just wanted to keep asking everybody you saw to make sure you're going the right way, because there definitely were times where someone had led someone the wrong way. So we figured if we're walking by somebody, you might as well ask. Although I guess at the same time, they might have said no, but it is funny when I watch it to hear Flushing Meadows Park this way, Flushing Meadow Park, guys.
And to this day, I still think out of all of the moments of the winning team running to the finish line, Matt, watching you and Rob cross the finish line with the heroic music playing and the Unisphere in the background is the greatest Amazing Race ending of all time and could never be recreated. So Brennan, what was going through your mind as you were running to the finish line and eventually landed on the mat with all of your fellow competitors cheering you on?
It's a difficult one to say. And when you watch sports or anything, like someone wins the World Series or the Super Bowl and they stick a microphone in the winning quarterback's face or something like that, and sometimes they say, I don't have any words, or I don't know what to say. It really is a true moment. Now, of course, we knew at the same time we're on a reality television show, we need to say something, but your mind's almost blank. And the other thing you'll hear people say is, I haven't processed it yet. And that was 100% true. You've been racing for a month and you've been stressed the whole time, and the whole goal has been to get to the end, but there's always another task. There's always something else to do. And now all of a sudden you're standing at the finish line. And you're like, is this real? So there are just so many different things going through my mind at that time. Like, wow, how cool. We won the race. Wait, is this really over? Who knows? Maybe I was even already thinking to myself, how are we going to be portrayed on TV? But there's so many different things running through your mind. It's crazy.
I'm actually going to pass by the exact window that I grew up at. That I used to look at the train from.
Flushing Meadows Park. There's the bridge we're looking for. Is this Flushing Meadows Park, guys? Flags! Woo! Let's keep it steady, dude. It's either we've won or we've lost at this point. Straight ahead. Straight ahead. Flags. Yep. Go all the way down this thing. Let's see the end. I hear some cheering, dude. That's a good sign.
guys are the official winners of the amazing race.
It's the most fulfilling, grueling, horrible, exciting, wonderful experience of my life, and I did it with my best friend.
Yeah, it was amazing. We had no idea we were going to end up here. I mean, we started off the race feeling strong, but there were a lot of low points, and we didn't think we were going to make it, but we stuck together. We never had any big drop-down, drag-out fights. We both did our job. I did my job, he did his job. We knew where each other's strengths were. We rode them, and this is where
And it's all these teams pushing us.
Yeah.
We're kick-ass competition, guys. We're kick-ass competition.
Well, as a viewer, and I've seen this season a bunch of times, as I said, but every time I watch it, I, as a viewer, feel like I have just went through this whole journey, and you stepping on that mat was the end of my journey as well. And I think that was one of the magic aspects of season 1.
Yeah, and magic is the right word because, like you said, the run to the finish line is so iconic, and the music, and it actually goes back to what I said when I didn't think the best way to win was going to be in a foot race. If we had been in a foot race, it wouldn't have been able to have that finish. It wouldn't have been able to show the juxtaposition of us running to the finish line with Frank and Margarita thinking they're winning, looking out the train towards where the finish line is, and they edit it together so well, and it's such a magical moment. Obviously, for me because we won. But then you get to season 2 and it is a foot race to the finish line. And that played just as well. And it's probably still the closest race in Amazing Race history. And we were almost that same type of finish. But I actually would take our finish and the way they were able to edit it together and the music that played and kind of the feelings that everybody had. You felt joyous for us. You felt bad for Frank and Margarita because they thought they won because it was the first season and they didn't know that the teams cheered no matter who was coming to the finish line. And so you'll just never be able to recreate that ever again.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where, as a fan of this show for over half of my life, I feel proud to be a fan watching that ending.
Yeah, and I think that ending is what hooked a lot of viewers because one of the things that made it special is Survivor was #1 in the ratings, and they moved our finale because our episodes were typically on Wednesday night. They moved it to Thursday night to air after an episode of Survivor, so we actually got a bump in viewership. And so now you've got these brand new fans watching their first episode of this Amazing Race television show, and you got a great ending like that, and that definitely was a good thing for starting season 2.
What was it like reuniting with the other teams, and did any of them ask what happened after we got eliminated?
It was great seeing the other teams. Here you've had this absolute life-changing experience, and these are the people you've experienced it with. And like I've said 100 times already during this, you got to know some of them very, very well. And so it was just as cool to see a lot of the teams as it was to actually cross the finish line and win. And yeah, we all went out to dinner that night after spending some time just alone in our hotel rooms. And it was a good chance to get to kind of download, talk to the other teams. People certainly ask, yeah, where'd you guys go? And what'd you guys do? But it was just a good time to bond with everybody.
And I know you had no idea that the show was even going to air, but how proud were you to know that not only had you won the first race, but you participated in something that had never been done on television before?
I think equally as proud for both. It was such an epic experience. We knew it was going to be well received and be good television. We were the first ones to ever do it, and we got to go to these absolutely amazing places. So definitely was proud of that. Was obviously also proud to be the winners. And one of the things a lot of people ask is, how were you able to keep the secret? Because like I mentioned before, the show was supposed to air in the summer. We filmed in March and April, but it didn't air until September. So we had to keep the secret for a while. Of course, season 32 has now broken our record by a lot. But it was not difficult to keep the secret because we knew when our friends and family watched that they were going to get the payoff. They were going to see us progress every leg, get towards the end. And then when the final episode happened, they were going to be, oh, who's going to win? And we knew they'd get the payoff. I always say if we were in Frank and Margarita's position, it probably would have been more difficult to keep that secret because we wouldn't have wanted our friends and family to be let down in that final episode.
Was it fun to watch the show, especially since you had no idea what the show was even going to look like edited together?
It was fun to watch. The most interesting thing, of course, I think for all of the participants is seeing what other people have to say about you. For example, we were rehashing the alliance with Frank and Margarita. And when we heard Frank bad-mouthing us and saying that we were trying to take off on him, and at one point he says, are they lawyers or liars? And we really had no idea that he was saying any of that kind of stuff. We didn't really understand why they were so angry with us. And so that's probably the most difficult part, is hearing what other people have to say about you. For us, it wasn't bad because we were generally a well-liked team and we really didn't do a whole lot for them to badmouth us. But that was the part you didn't know about, because what other teams are doing or what other teams are saying when you're not around is not part of your adventure. So that's the one thing you see on TV that ended up being unexpected. Here's a little aside. The summer when they were editing our race together before it aired, coincidentally, one of my best girlfriends, she started dating a guy who was a TV editor, and he got hired to work on race. So I got to understand the editing process a little bit. And he told me straight up, if you ever watched the show, and I'm sure because this is the first time you've talked to me, Rob definitely has more sound bites on the show than I do. So all our friends in real life are like, I don't get it. How come Rob's the one doing all the talking, all the sound bites? Because in real life, it's the opposite. I'm the talker. Rob's not. He's more of an introvert. And the reason is because Rob wraps things up in a nice little succinct soundbite. I tend to ramble and I tend to talk a lot. And then I realize, oh, wait, I got to go back and I got to explain this. And then I got to go forward and I got to do that. And the editor friend, who's now married to that friend of mine, he just told me it was very difficult to take a soundbite from me. And so I knew that this was going to be a long conversation because I love explaining things.
And I know that travel has been a huge part of your life since the race ended, and it really sparked your interest in traveling. But have you ever been back to Flushing Meadows Park and the Unisphere to reminisce about that final leg?
Kevin and I did it about 3 months after race. So during the time between filming and airing, because we started in New York and Kevin lived in New Jersey just across from Manhattan, I actually went and visited him a couple times. And on one of those visits during the middle of the summer, we went, in fact, I can tell you about exactly when it was. It would have been in either late July or early August, because when we were walking through Manhattan at one point, a van, the kind of van without any windows in the back, and the guy driving and the guy in the passenger seat were both Middle Eastern. So after September 11th happened and there was an FBI tip line, Kevin called me up and he's like, oh, and they were looking for the Statue of Liberty. I forgot that's what it was. They came up to us and they said, where's the Statue of Liberty? And Kevin actually said, should I be calling the FBI tip line to tell them that a couple of guys were asking us where the Statue of Liberty was? And I said, well, that's probably not going to be much of a tip for them. But the only reason I remember that so well is because it was about a month or so before September 11th happened. So anyway, around that time, during that trip, we recreated and I took pictures at the finish line, right from going to Vincent Daniel Square, hopping on the 7 train, getting off at Flushing Meadows and running to the finish line. The funny thing is after race, I was in New York City all the time. That's where we had to do our press. I had a lot of friends there. I'd go back for Tarcons that they have. I used to go back to New York all the time. I haven't been to New York City now. I think I know when it was. I ran the New York City Marathon in 2009. So it's been 11 years since I've been in New York City, which is crazy to think about, but I need to get back there at some point.
Well, I think a visit to New York for you is definitely needed, especially since next year, 2021, will be the 20th anniversary of the first ever Amazing Race. Can you believe it's been 20 years since you raced around the world and won $1 million with Rob?
No, it's crazy, especially when you think back to some of the early seasons when race wasn't doing that well in the ratings and there was a chance it wasn't going to survive. And now here we are 20 years later and the race is still on the air. It's absolutely mind-boggling. One of the jokes I always tell people is, do you remember the show The Mole?
Of course, I love The Mole.
Okay, so a lot of people don't even remember that show. And that aired on ABC, and it got about the same ratings as Amazing Race. And they did 3 or 4 regular seasons. They did a couple of celebrity seasons, but it made 4 to 6 seasons, I think, and then it went off the air. So for me, 19, 20 years later, I still get to say I won the first Amazing Race. And everybody knows what the Amazing Race is because it still is on the air. And I think about the person that won the first Mole, and they tell people, hey, I won the first season of The Mole. And people are going to be like, what was that? So it is pretty cool that 20 years later, it's still on the air.
You know what's so funny? Friends of mine know how intense I am about knowledge of game shows and reality TV shows. And people say to me, oh, did you know that Anderson Cooper hosted a reality show? I said, yes, right. I know. He hosted The Mole.
He hosted The Mole. Yep, that's right.
Mole, noun, a spy, a double agent who establishes a cover long before beginning espionage. Our story begins in the California desert.
10 strangers set off on a 28-day journey that will take them over 15,000 miles to 4 countries on 2 continents. Each destination brings a new test for the players.
Each test they pass adds money to a group pot that only one player will win and could grow up to $1 million.
But one of the 10 players is a mole, a double agent working for us to sabotage the group's efforts
by preventing them from passing the tests.
No one knows who the mole is, so no one knows whom they can trust. Not all of them will complete the journey, because every few days there's a quiz about the mole, with questions like, is the mole male or female? How old is the mole? Even, what did the mole have for breakfast?
The player who scores the lowest on the quiz is executed and must leave the game immediately.
It is a simple game. Be observant, expose the mole, claim the money. Each player has a strategy, but only one will win. The one who correctly answers the question, who is the mole?
The first 2 seasons of The Mole were hosted by Anderson Cooper, then 2 more seasons of a celebrity version of The Mole aired before ABC canceled the show. However, The Mole was brought back 4 years later for an additional season with host John Kelly, but it was canceled again after the end of that season. Brad fact!
Yep, I do remember that, yeah.
Now, I know that during the race, you and Rob marked down certain information on your beige safari hats, including the number of days on the race, order of the teams eliminated, and the locations you went to. So I was wondering, Brennan, if all these years later, you and Rob still have those hats.
Yep. I don't know for sure that Rob does, but I'm pretty sure he does. I would be very surprised if he got rid of it. But I 100% have mine. And as a matter of fact, back in January, right before we all went into quarantine, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and they had recommended bringing some type of hat like that. So I actually brought my hat from the race because all it's done for the most part is sit in a box since race. I actually have had a couple little displays of some of my other, I guess we'll say paraphernalia or collectibles, but the hat just hasn't made it into any of those. And so I brought it with me. I wore it for, I guess what you'd call the first leg because it was an 8-day trip. I figured the marker on there was permanent. I got one raindrop on it and I saw a little run of the black and I immediately put it in my bag and never took it out again. But I did wear it for one day while climbing Mount Kilimanjaro 19 years later. Here's the one thing that is still logging miles. I still travel with my race backpack. I just got back from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico last Wednesday with my race pack. And I made a spreadsheet probably 10 years ago to try and figure out how many miles on it. And I haven't kept it up, but at that point, it already had over like 600,000 or 700,000 miles. So I think that bag is probably closing in on 1 million miles.
That thing should be in the Smithsonian.
Well, the funny thing is some of my friends are like, you should get in contact with the company that makes it. They're called Eagle Creek. And he's like, they have to like do some kind of commercial with you or something like that. But yeah, it is incredible that that thing's still going. Now, other things, Rob and I wore hiking boots on the whole thing. And those things are just falling apart. I still do have them, but they're in really bad shape. There's no way I could wear them. But yeah, it's pretty impressive that backpack has made it that long.
Did you keep any of the clues from along the race course?
So that was kind of a controversial topic. We were not supposed to. We were supposed to hand them in at the end of every leg, but I like to collect things. I wanted to keep them. I knew that was going to be nostalgia there. So I wasn't the only one to do it. Other teams did it as well. We get to a point where we had to hand in our clues and we would hand in the envelope and the little foldable thing or whatever that they come in, but we would keep the actual clue because all they did was we'd throw it away when production was there and they just wouldn't even notice. The one that disappoints me the most is when we were in Alaska, I had all my Alaska clues in the pocket of the jacket that production gave us. They did give us big parkas when we were in Alaska. So after I jumped in the water at Fish Lake and it said we had to go to New York, I just left that jacket sitting there and all the clues were in there. So after the race, me and a bunch of the other contestants that had kept some, we all made color copies for each other. So I probably have 2/3 of the clues, either originals or photocopies of them.
Including the final clue?
The final clue I 100% have because Rob crumpled it up in his hand as we were running to the finish line. And I have that crumpled one. And then they actually did give us the copy of that as well so that it was in good shape. So I have the copy that production gave us and I have the original one that was crumpled up.
See, now that should be a complete Smithsonian package.
For sure. And what I did is I had them all sitting in boxes for years and I made this big shadow box. I framed them all. I took them to a frame shop and it's got my passport in it. It's got a bunch of the clues. It's got the Tunisia flag and then some other little tchotchkes we picked up, like coasters when we were in China. It's got a whole bunch of that stuff on there. So I collect, my favorite movies are the Star Wars movies, and I collect Star Wars paraphernalia from when I was 8 years old, like you were when you saw a race. And so to me, that collecting mentality, I guess, came over to Amazing Race. I thought, hey, I'm the one that has these, so I'm going to keep them. So yeah, it is a cool thing to have.
And you got to go to Tatooine.
And we got to go to Tatooine. So here's what's funny is somehow on race, I guess during the mingling times, all the other contestants knew I was a Star Wars fan and Star Wars collector. I knew Tatooine, and I knew Tunisia generally was where they filmed Star Wars locations. But when we were doing the walkie-talkie task, there was a sign outside that mentioned that it was a Star Wars filming location. I didn't see it. And we were obviously, as we talked about, in last place. So I was so frantic, I didn't notice. Not until we got to the pit stop. I think it was Karen who said something to me, but one of the contestants said, hey, what'd you think being at a Star Wars filming location? I was like, huh? So I kind of missed it while I was there. But yeah, it was pretty cool to go to.
A detour is a choice between two tasks, each with its own pros and cons. Teams must choose the task they think they can complete faster. Puzzling requires teams to solve a simple puzzle at this place, Qasr Oled Sultan, which is hard to find. Listening requires teams to play a difficult game with walkie-talkies at this place, Qasr Hadada, which was used as a Star Wars movie set and is easy to find. Teams must travel in one of these cars and choose whether to spend the equivalent of $50 to hire a driver or save the money and drive themselves. Drivers cannot give directions. Teams must find their own way using only a simple map.
So in 2007, the first ever All-Stars edition of The Amazing Race aired. Now, as the first winners, were you and Rob even contacted about possibly coming back for All-Stars?
We were not. We were very disappointed. And we learned from someone in production in the first few seasons, so many young, male, white teams won. And so they decided to ask none of us back. And the quote we heard from someone in production, whether this is the real quote or not, was no alpha male teams, especially Rob and Brennan. So we were like, what? We were that bad that you're not even considering having us back for an all-star team? So I don't know if that's true or not, but no, they did not even ask us.
I don't know if that's a compliment or just a diss.
To be honest, I was not surprised. Now, on the one hand, because I've always been an athlete my whole life, I look at it as an all-star. It should be the best team. So who's that? It's the teams that win. But on the other hand, I know it's a reality television show. And really, the true all-stars are the ones that made the best TV. I knew Kevin and Drew were the most popular team on our season. I knew that the Guidos were the villains and made for better TV than us. And looking back on it, I think it's because I hadn't watched much reality TV. Rob and I were a little scared going into the race because we were lawyers. So we thought right from the beginning, there's a good chance they try to make us the villains. I also knew that because I am an athlete, I can get competitive and mouth off and stuff like that quite a bit. So I really tried to hold that at bay. So truth is, we didn't give them what they thought we were going to give them. We held back. And looking back on it, I think we would have given them a lot more had we not held back like we did. And so I think that's why I wasn't surprised, to be honest, when we didn't get asked. And when you've only got that many seasons, you're not going to take 3 teams from the same season. I knew they'd asked Kevin and Drew and Team Guido before us.
What did you think of the cast as a whole?
Most of the teams were teams I expected. The only team that I didn't like was the one team a lot of people didn't like, of course, was Eric and Danielle, because, of course, they weren't a real team. But the reason I extra didn't like it was because the reason they were a team is because they dated after the show. Well, Emily and I dated after our show. Granted, we were broken up by them, but then I found out later that Eric and Danielle were actually broken up when they did the race. So I was like, how come they didn't ask me and Emily instead? So yeah, that was just kind of me being a little spiteful because I dated a girl from my season. And I think more people watched our season than their season. So I thought, well, if they're not going to ask me and Rob, then ask me and Emily. And so I had 2 chances that fell by the wayside of being on All Stars. Because for me, the first race was such a huge life-changing experience. There's nothing more that I would want in life than to do the Amazing Race again. So when they did All Stars and they didn't ask us, I was definitely disappointed.
Well, it's funny how you mentioned that you figured they wouldn't have 3 teams from the same season represented, because it turns out that during season 18, Unfinished Business, they featured 5 teams from season 14, and for the second All-Star season, season 24, production chose 3 teams from season 18 to race for their 3rd time, as well as 4 teams from season 22. Brad fact.
That's another production thing I'll never understand. For whatever reason, production has in their mind, or this is what I've heard. I guess I can't quote them, but this is what I have heard. Well, backing up, you think about Survivor, whenever they do all-star seasons, they, for the most part, pull from the entire run of the show. Same thing with Big Brother. With Race, every time they've done any kind of second chance or all-star season, they've only taken teams from the last few seasons. They don't reach back to the beginning. That's why everybody was so surprised that Colin and Christy were on. And the reason Colin and Christy were on is because they actually asked. And so when they did that season and they only pulled people from the few seasons before, that's why you end up with 5 teams from the same season, because they're not reaching all the way back to season 1. They're not even reaching back to any of the single digit seasons. So anyway, what I was saying, I didn't want to put words in production's mouth, but what I've heard is because Race is not as character driven as Survivor and Big Brother, they think that teams don't remember the early season teams. So that's why they pull from the seasons that are closest to whenever that all-star race is. But I hear from fans, it's the exact opposite. A true fan like you, now granted, you know everybody, but a fan like you that's watched in season 1, I guarantee if you ask them who won season 1 and who won season, I'll just throw 16 or season 25, I'll bet you they'll come up with Rob and Brennan before they come up with later seasons, because whenever you watch any TV show, you seem to be more affected by the ones you watch at the beginning than the later ones. Everything kind of starts to run together. And actually, I can tell you that as a fan of Survivor. I can tell you right off the bat, seasons 1 through 6, who won all of those. Then you get into double-digit seasons. I don't know who won. They're all kind of run together.
I would actually think that casting racers from older seasons would be a smart idea for CBS, because now that we have streaming sites that people can watch past Amazing Race seasons on, if new fans see teams they've never seen before, I think that would incentivize them to watch the seasons those teams were originally on, and that might lead to them binge watching all the older seasons and becoming bigger fans of the show.
That's a good point, because if you've got somebody who, say, picked it up in season 21 and that's all they've watched, then you put a team from season 4 on All Stars and they like that team. They're like, oh, now I want to go back and watch season 4 to see what they did back then. So yeah, good point.
So far, season 7 winners Uchenna and Joyce are the only winners to ever be invited back for a second time. Brad fact! Now, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk about an all-winner season. So, since they were the only winners to ever be invited back, and now that we've had a Survivor season comprised of all winners, are you hopeful that The Amazing Race will do an all-winner season, and would you like to be a part of it?
Yes, I get asked about it all the time. And it's amazing how many times people are like, how come they've never done an all-winner season? So I am very hopeful that they'll do it. And I think the reason they did not back when they first started doing the first All-Stars is because Amazing Race, like I said, it's less character driven. And the teams that do well in Amazing Race, because there's no voting off, obviously we know a lot of second place teams might have technically been the better team, but the first place team is usually one of the best teams. And in order to win Race, you got to be a good team. I always joke that the way you get a lot of airtime on Race is you're funny, you fight, or you get lost. Well, if you fight and you get lost, you're probably not going to do very well. So the teams that win don't do a lot of that. So towards the beginning, when you've got to come up with an all-winner season of only 11 teams and you've maybe done 14 seasons, you're probably not going to have the greatest cast. And I get that. But now you've got a lot of winners to choose from. You can come up with a good cast. So I think it's time to do it. The second half of your question, would we do it? In an absolute heartbeat. Like I mentioned before, Rob and I are still best friends. We're both in great shape. Like I said, I climbed Kilimanjaro earlier this year. I do Spartan races all the time. I've stayed in great shape. So I think the fact that they don't like to cast some of the older teams because maybe they'll be at a physical disadvantage, that doesn't work for us. So yeah, I'd love to do it. I think we'd have a good shot. And yeah, it would be absolutely incredible to be back on the race.
Is there a group of winners that you would hope would be on the cast of all winners?
That's a tough question. I guess you know how I have to answer that is I'm going to want to win again. But obviously, when you're up against all winners, that's going to be tough. So if I had to pick and choose, I would pick a lot of the teams that you're like, oh, how'd they win? So I'd probably pick all the long shot winners so that it gives us an advantage.
Well, I would hope that they would also increase it to 12 teams so you get an extra winner in there.
Yeah, I thought about that too. It is true. That's going to be the hard thing is you've got 32 teams. Say they decided not to continue with season 33 and they threw a winner's race out there now. You've got 32 teams and you've got to choose 11 or 12. There's going to be a lot of disappointed winners. Now, obviously, there are some who have broken up and there are teams just you're not going to choose, but that would be super disappointing if they did a race and did not ask Rob and I to do it. But people always tell me when they ask about a winner's version and I say, well, there's a lot of winners out there. They might not pick us. They always say, well, they have to pick you. You're the first winners, but they don't have to pick anybody. But I think we would make, I'll tell you this, way better TV than we did the first time because this time we wouldn't care about that part. We'd just go out there and do our best to win the race.
Well, the Amazing Race has certainly changed since season 1. Now the race is filmed in only 21 days. The flight booking situation is considerably easier. And the race now features U-turns, and there's no longer the luxury of having a fast forward on every leg. So based on a format perspective, if you and Rob were to come back, how well do you think the two of you would do?
So I think one of the things we would have to do is I'm still a viewer of the show. I still watch every season. Rob has not. And I've told him if we ever get asked back, you're going to have to binge watch some seasons because the format is somewhat different. They've got challenges where we have to remember things that happen. Now, granted, we thought they could do that on our race. I actually did have a journal and I wrote down a lot of things just in case they did something like that. But I think, like I said, we're both still in great shape. So if it's just running with your backpacks to get from point A to point B, we can certainly keep up with any younger team. We're both still lawyers and putting it out there, just above average intelligence. That hasn't changed. So I think we would have a really good shot. I think we still would be a super strong team, but it obviously would be a little bit of a disadvantage, I think, because we haven't done a second race yet. And teams, if they're picking recent winners, they're in the same format. But let's go back to Colin and Christy. They went from season 5 to season 31 and they took on all recent teams and they beat them. So I think the format change might be a little bit of a disadvantage, but not enough that I think it keeps us from winning. And I don't think it would take but a couple legs to figure that out. So survive a leg or two and you got the new format down.
And plus, I think you have something to prove in terms of season 1, because in All-Stars, Kevin and Drew were the second eliminated and Joe and Bill fell back into their normal habits of getting 24 hours behind.
Well, like you asked before, whether we were disappointed, certainly we were disappointed we didn't get to go on that race. And then when you saw how they represented our season, we were definitely disappointed because we would have done better than both of them for sure.
When you were watching, was that a shock to see Kevin and Drew, who came in 4th place, be second out, and then Joe and Bill once again fell so far behind the other teams?
It wasn't a shock to see Kevin and Drew go out. I knew that Drew was having some health problems at the time, and I knew that it was even touch and go whether they were going to race just because I was close enough with Kevin. So that really wasn't a surprise. It was a surprise, I guess, more so with Bill and Joe. I think they didn't go into our season with the intention of being villains. They just decided to play the game the way they did, and that turned them into the villains. And obviously, a lot of people did not like them. And it's got to be tough when you are the villains and you got to read all the stuff online. I had a hard enough time reading a lot of it when we were one of the well-liked teams. So I think they went into the All-Star season trying to be Joe and Bill light and not play that way. And who knows, maybe that hurt their game. But I was surprised to see them go out as early as they did, but I wasn't surprised to see Kevin and Drew go out like they did.
And that was before the internet was as crazy as it is today.
Well, the difference I think then is it was all message boards. So every racer was on reading about themselves on the message boards, but the fans didn't know, and the fans talked about us and they talked to each other about us. The difference now, of course, is everybody has social media pages and they talk to you, like on Twitter and all that. And that's why it must be even more difficult now, because back then we still were characters on a TV show, even though we were real people, that nobody had any contact or connection to us other than watching us on TV. Now with social media, everybody's out there.
Now, season 25 featured teams retrieving their second clue at the Unisphere because the opening was in New York City. Did you see that moment?
Yeah, that was super cool. I definitely remember that. Knew it was going to happen. I had heard that season 25 had some callbacks to season 1. So I was excited to watch that. And yeah, very cool just to see, hey, there's somebody racing at the same place where I won $1 million.
And you and Rob were present at the season 27 starting line, which was the second time that fans were allowed to come.
Welcome to a very early morning start on what might be the hippest beach in America. As you can see, we have a number of Amazing Race fans here. We've got some ex-Amazing Racers. Rob and Brennan, the first winners of the Amazing Race, the first team to win $1 million are here.
Now, were you asked by production to come, or did you actually just show up as fans?
We didn't specifically get asked. I don't remember how the word got out. I mean, obviously we knew that it was going to be a public start, and I don't remember if it was from another racer or whether it was somebody involved with production that's kind of like, hey, come on down. It wasn't like we got a specific email that said, hey, please, we would like you to be at the start. It was just kind of a general call out to everybody like, hey, if you want to come down. And what was cool about it was, let's say there were 20 racers that showed up at the start line. It was pretty cool to have good old Bert, the executive producer, creator, and the guy who's run the show the whole time, come over to me and Rob and say, hey, come here. Because we were just kind of in the group with all the fans, and he pulled us out and put us up front right there behind Phil. So kind of made you feel good, like, hey, we are the OGs, so we get the front and center spot. That felt kind of nice.
Who else was there from the former racers?
Kim and Allie. Laura Pearson, who won season 26. Oh, well, here's one of the funny stories for former racers. And actually, this kind of goes back to the All Winners edition. One of my best friends is Alex, who won season 2. In fact, I was just in his wedding last year, so that's how close we are. He lives about 3 blocks from me in Marina Del Rey, which is right next to Venice. So that starting line for season 27 was in Venice. Alex didn't know that it was starting there, or he just wasn't planning on going. He's on a jog, and he comes up all sweaty, and he's like, oh, hey, guys. And he hung out with us for a little bit, and he actually didn't even stay for the start. He took off. But what a coincidence that in Los Angeles, you get the winner of Amazing Race 2 just jogging by when Amazing Race 27 is starting. The funny thing with him is I think a lot of production know that we are super, super close. So I guess there's always that one other chance that if for whatever reason they decide they don't want me and Rob back, there's always a chance they could do another mixed team and Alex and I could be racing partners because we're super close as well.
Before we get to the game, my last question is, besides Kevin, are there any other teams or members from Amazing Race 1 that you still keep in touch with?
So because of Facebook, I do keep in touch with most of the racers. So every year with Facebook memories, things will come up about race and you'll tag some of the other racers and somebody might say, hey, how you doing? Or what's going on? But outside of that and just kind of that Facebook contact, I guess the best way to put it is there's nobody that I'm going to text and catch up or give a phone call and catch up with as much as Kevin. Like I mentioned before, Emily and I dated after our race. We remained friends for many years, actually, and we remained in touch for a long time. Emily doesn't do social media for whatever reason, so I actually have lost contact with her. I think the last time I spoke with her was 6 or 7 years ago, but we did stay in touch for a long time outside of social media. But nowadays, other than a Facebook catch up here and there, it's just Kevin and Rob, of course. When it comes right down to it, the experience of the race was amazing. It was obviously super cool being on TV. But in the end, I've made a lot of friends, not just from race, but even reality TV in general. So that was another part of the life-changing experience of the race.
Well, Brennan, we have reached my favorite portion of the game show. And as someone who has studied the Amazing Race for years, it is always fun for me to have the chance to use my knowledge of the show to create a game based all around the Amazing Race trivia stored in my head. It is time for the game of the day.
Game of the day.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin told me that I have to amp up my game for you because of how knowledgeable you are with Amazing Race facts, especially regarding the Amazing Race period. Well, I did my best to give you a true Amazing Race trivia challenge. So, Brennan, your game is none other than the same game I played with Kevin. This is Race Route Recap. Race Route Recap. And because your first destination on the Amazing Race period was Africa, the background music for this game will be Africa by Toto. And here's how the game works. In front of me are the names of the 10 Amazing Race destinations you traveled to during Season 1, which are the United States, South Africa, Zambia, France, Tunisia, Italy, India, Thailand, China, and back to the United States. Each destination corresponds to a multiple-choice Amazing Race trivia question. But even though these questions are related to the destinations of the first race, the questions themselves aren't necessarily about the first race. They could be about any aspect from the history of the Amazing Race that are associated with the Season 1 destinations. You're going to answer the questions in route order from question 1 about the United States all the way to question 10 about the United States. And Brennan, if you can answer 6 out of the 10 questions correctly, you will cross the finish line first and be deemed a winner. And one more element to mention. After getting your first correct answer, you will receive a fast forward, which means if you hear a question you don't know the answer to, you could use the fast forward and automatically receive the correct answer point to that question. And in case you were wondering why you get the fast forward after only one correct answer, well, on the Amazing Race period, you and Rob earned your fast forward on leg 1. So I feel it's only appropriate that you earn your race route recap fast forward after answering one question correctly. Also, just to let you know, Kevin unfortunately did not win Race Route Recap when he played. Kevin got 4 correct answers, which includes the correct answer he earned from using his fast forward. So you can add another first to your Amazing Race resume and become the first ever winner of Race Route Recap right here on the game show. In addition, all of the questions you're about to face are different questions than the ones Kevin faced, in case you were wondering. So Brennan, almost 20 years after traveling the race route for real, are you ready to travel the Season 1 race route from the comforts of your own chair?
I'm ready.
Then let's play Race Route Recap. And of course, we're going to start with the United States. And here comes your first question. Which of these Amazing Race seasons featured a starting line in New York City? Is it Season 8, Season 18, or Season 28?
I'm going to go with Season 28.
Lock that in?
Yes.
Unfortunately, it was Season 8.
Season 8.
Season 8 was the family edition of The Amazing Race, and it started at Empire Fulton Ferry State Park. And that was near the Brooklyn Bridge. Season 18, Unfinished Business, started in Palm Springs, and Season 28 started at the team's homes for the first time ever. Brad fact!
Yes, I do remember that now.
But no worries, we'll just start new. Here comes your South Africa question. During Leg 5 of The Amazing Race Season 7, teams traveled to the Orlando Children's Home in what Johannesburg township? Is it Deep Sloot, Soweto, or Orange Farm?
I'm going to go with Soweto.
You locking that in?
Yes.
Well, I am happy to say that it is Soweto.
All right, got one right, and I got my fast forward.
Yes, you have your fast forward. Soweto is the largest South African township by population, in case you'd like to know. Brad fact! So you have your fast forward, which means anytime you don't like a question, you can use your fast forward, and I'll give you the correct answer point for that question. Remember, just like on the race, you can only use it once.
Okay.
This is question 3 of 10, and this is about Zambia. 5 more for a win. During the near option of the Leg 2 detour on The Amazing Race Season 1, teams had to capture photos of 3 out of 5 animals at the national park. Which of these was not one of the 5 animals in the provided list of animals? Is it rhino, giraffe, or hippo?
It's hippo.
You locking that in?
Locking that in.
Do you remember what the 5 animals were?
Well, giraffe and rhino, impala, zebra. I'm going to say water buffalo is the 5th.
Well, you are right on everything. Hippo is the correct answer, and you're right. Giraffe, zebra, rhino, impala, and water buffalo.
When Kevin said I have good Amazing Race memory, I remember my season. I wouldn't call myself a super fan because I only watch every season one time, so that's why everything kind of runs together. But my season, for whatever reason, I guess because it was such a life-changing experience, I remember everything pretty well.
But this game is going to prove yourself wrong that you do know other seasons.
Yeah, well, let's keep going.
So you have 2 correct answers, and here comes your next question. This is about France. The Amazing Race Season 10 was the first time after Season 1 to visit which of these Paris landmarks? The Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, or Notre Dame?
The Eiffel Tower.
Are you locking that in?
I'll lock that in.
It is the Eiffel Tower.
All right, good. I didn't remember exactly the season, but I do remember that they went back to the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, the Eiffel Tower was visited during Leg 12 of Season 10. Brad fact! 3 down, 3 to go. This is your Tunisia question.
Okay.
At the beginning of the 4th leg during the Amazing Race Season 1, the teams received a small flag of Tunisia. Where is the crescent moon-like image located on the Tunisian flag? Is it in the upper left-hand corner, inside a center circle, or inside a center star?
The moon and the star, I believe, are in a center circle. Locking it in.
That is correct.
All right.
You have 4 down, and I know you're a big strategist. If you get 1 more correct without the fast forward, you could technically win.
All right. Let's see what we can do.
We're now on question 6. Here's your Italy question. During leg 7 of season 12 in Empoli, Italy, a fast-forward challenge required both team members to get a permanent tattoo of what? Is it the letters TAR for The Amazing Race, the number 12 for season 12, or the letters FF for fast forward?
I am going to say it is FF for fast forward.
Are you locking that in?
I'm locking it in.
Why do you think it's FF?
Because when you mentioned all three, that was my first inclination. I've always learned to go with your first inclination.
Well, that first inclination of yours is absolutely correct.
All right. I like it.
You now have 5 correct answers, which means you could technically win right now if you use the fast forward on the next question. But let's see if you can win this game without having to use the fast forward.
I'm all for it, yeah.
Here comes your India question. This is question 7. How many times has the famous head-shaving fast-forward challenge in India appeared in the American version of The Amazing Race? Is it 2, 3, or 4?
I think we're going to have to win this by using my fast forward because, I mean, obviously I remember when Uchenna and Joyce did it, when Joyce shaved her head, but I can't remember beyond that. My answer would be 2, but I don't know for sure, so I'm going to use my fast forward.
All right, you're going to use your fast forward, which means that is your 6th correct answer. So congratulations, Brennan. You have won this game of Race Route Recap.
All right, I like it. Thanks.
Now, you'd have said 2, and good thing you used your fast forward. It's actually 3.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, the head shaving challenge appeared during leg 9 of season 5 in Kolkata, which was the first time they ever did it. Leg 8 in season 7 in Jodhpur, and that was when Uchenna and Joyce faced that challenge. And as a switchback during leg 10 of season 20 in Karthala, India. Brad fact! And since there are only 3 questions left, Brennan, let's continue our journey with question 8. And this is your Thailand question. During which Amazing Race season that visited Thailand did a team win the fast forward for eating a bowl of fried crickets and grasshoppers, a traditional Thai meal? Is it season 9, season 14, or season 19?
This one's just a complete guess. I'm going to go with season 9.
Are you locking that in?
Locking that in.
Well, it's a complete guess, but your instincts were correct again. It is season 9.
Right. That time I did once again go with my first instinct, but that maybe was just because you said season 9 first. Who knows?
Which now means that technically you have won this game without the use of the fast forward. That is your 6th official correct answer without a fast forward.
All right, nice.
And by the way, the fast forward was won by eventual season 9 winners BJ and Tyler. Brad fact! Would you like to see BJ and Tyler on the all-winner season if it eventually came about?
If we are on it for sure, then yeah, I'd like to see them.
Well, you have 7 correct answers, and you have 2 questions left, so let's see how well you do with China. During Season 11 in Macau, China, the remaining teams participated in which of these historic Amazing Race challenges? The longest zip line, the highest skydive, the tallest tower jump?
So Macau, China is a large city, so I'm going to go with C, the tower jump. Locking that in.
Excellent reasoning. It is the tallest tower jump.
All right, we'll take it.
During Leg 11, which was the All-Star season, for the roadblock, one team member had to complete a 660-foot sky jump off of the Macau Tower, which was the highest tower jump performed in the history of the Amazing Race. Brad fact! So you have 8 correct answers, and this is the final question. We have made it around the world already. Can you believe it?
That was way faster than my first time.
And so much less energy needed. So here we go. You have 8 correct answers. This is to win you 9 out of 10. The United States. Here's the question. The Amazing Race Season 6 was the second season to feature the starting line and the finish line in the same city. Which city was it? Is it A, Los Angeles, B, Chicago, or C, San Francisco?
I remember that season pretty well, too, but I can't remember which of those cities it was. So I know season 2 finished in San Francisco. So that was close enough to 6 that I'm going to eliminate that. Part of me wants to say Los Angeles because, of course, there were a lot of races that started in Los Angeles. But I do know there was an early season. I remember them finishing in Chicago. I'm going to go with Chicago.
Are you locking in Chicago?
Locking it in.
Well, you were right. San Francisco was season 2. Los Angeles, they started at Dodger Stadium in season 4, but season 6 started and ended in Chicago. You are correct.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned season 4 being in Los Angeles. I should have remembered that because I was at Dodger Stadium for the start of season 4. And now that I mentioned that, I was at the Santa Monica Pier for the start of season 5. So it would have been crazy if they did 3 seasons in LA in a row. So anyway, it doesn't matter. I got it right.
Wait, so what do you mean you were at the start? They invited you?
So what happened was for season 4, Rob and I were hired by the TV show Extra to cover the starting line. We are here in Dodger Stadium, ready for the start of Amazing Race 4. They waited until the show was ready to air, but we were actually there. We were down on the field and we interviewed Phil and had Phil do a mock elimination, which never made it on Extra. But yeah, we did that for the TV show. And then the next season, just because we had been there at season 4 and we had friends in production, we heard it was starting at the Santa Monica Pier and we asked someone and they said, yeah, come on down. So it was cool. We were at the start line for seasons 4 and 5, obviously not like season 27 because we were just in the background with production.
Have you ever thought about getting back into interviewing for entertainment news?
Not anymore. After Amazing Race, I realized I just got paid $500,000 to be myself and be on camera and travel around the world. I'm like, how cool is that? And I remember one of the producers that we did the interviews with, even though, like I said, I tend to ramble, he was like, you've done this before, haven't you? I'm like, nope. And he goes, yeah, you should consider hosting afterwards. And so what made it different back then is we did have a true 15 minutes of fame. Like now, if you're on season 32 of the race, it's fun while you're on, but nobody remembers you as soon as it's over. But because the shows were so new back then, Rob and I got calls from casting directors and producers and agents, and you actually had the opportunity to possibly do some stuff in television. And so we had both just won $500,000. So we quit our legal jobs and gave the entertainment business a shot. And I did for a while. I went back to being a lawyer, but continued doing that on the side, going to auditions and all that because the opportunities were there living in Los Angeles. And then it just got to a point where I just liked being able to go back to the foundation of being a lawyer, and I knew where my paycheck was coming from and I had a steady job, and so I left those behind. And as a matter of fact, I went back to the same law firm, and for a while I was an independent contractor because I was still doing Hollywood stuff. And when I finally became a salaried employee again, the managing partner said, you got to leave your Hollywood dreams behind. So it's really not an interest anymore, but it definitely was for a while.
So with 9 correct answers, and 8 of which you did on your own, Brennan, congratulations, you have won this game of Race Route Recap.
I love it. Thanks so much. The only thing I'll say, I guess being a perfectionist, I'm a little disappointed that I missed the one that I did without using my fast forward because I thought about it afterwards. Season 8, the family edition, Kevin and Drew were hot dog vendors in New York City, so I should have remembered that race started in New York.
Well, as a perfectionist myself, I can honestly say that you did a fantastic job at this game, and I hope you had fun playing it.
Well, I appreciate it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I feel like I would have enjoyed it even if I hadn't done that well, because it's always fun reliving things like that.
It certainly is. And that was the game of the day, Race Route Recap. Race Route Recap. Well, Brennan, this has been an absolute treat getting the chance to chat with you about the Amazing Race. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the game show today.
Well, it was a treat for me as well, because even though it's been 19 years, I always enjoy reliving the race and getting to talk about some of the things that you didn't see on TV. So it was a pleasure.
And you, of course, always have an open invitation to join me again if you'd like to talk some more about the Amazing Race, or if you'd just like to test your knowledge on another game.
That sounds great. Thanks, Bradley.
And I hope I finally get the chance to watch you race around the world again real soon.
Me too. If it does happen with the whole COVID thing going on, I don't think it'll be anytime soon. But actually, that's a good thing right now because, as I mentioned towards the beginning, Rob just had his first kid. So if they asked us right now, I have a feeling he might say no because his kid is a newborn. So I kind of like the fact that it might be a little while before they ask us, because then Rob won't have that excuse.
Well, whenever the Amazing Race All-Winners season happens, I hope that casting asks you back and both you and Rob can say yes. And Brennan, once again, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I hope you enjoyed this just as much as I have.
I definitely did, and I appreciate you having me on.
All right, take care. I'll tell Kevin you say hi.
Okay. Thanks, Bradley. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. Well, it looks like we have reached the final leg of this episode of the game show. Unfortunately, the final leg consists of me signing off. My thanks once again to Brennan Swain, one half of teammates Rob and Brennan, the first ever winners of the Amazing Race, for being my guest today. Now, Brennan isn't the only guest I've had on the game show to run the inaugural season of the Amazing Race, so if you want to re-listen to this episode, as well as check out episode number 8 and episode number 15, featuring third place finishers Joe Baldessere and Bill Bartek, aka Team Guido, or episode number 44 featuring Kevin O'Connor from 4th place team Kevin and Drew, all you have to do is log on to www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke, that's BRADLEY_CLARKE/sets/the game show. That's www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke, that's BRADLEY_CLARKE/sets/the game show. Plus, don't forget to like The Game Show Starring Bradley Clarke on Facebook and follow The Game Show Starring Bradley Clarke on Twitter using the handle @TheGameShowBC and hashtag #TheGameShow. But of course, be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode of The Talk Show, all about the world of television game and competition shows, The Game Show. I'm Bradley Clarke, the Bradster, and I've got to go run to the finish mat at the Unisphere in Flushing Meadows Park. Bye for now. All of the Amazing Race cuts and sounds used during this episode of The Game Show are courtesy of the CBS television network.
This edition of The Game Show was created and produced by Bradley Clarke. This is Austin Angelo speaking.
The Game Show is a Bradley Clarke production. Get your game on.